Well, hello there. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn as Invincible with Superman Powers, Part 3. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
The moment his boots hit the ground of the GDA, Mark was already moving. Down sterile white halls, past stunned GDA agents, toward the medical wing. Anissa matched his pace, keeping a respectful step behind. Eve was in one of the secured recovery rooms. According to the latest report, she was stable thanks to her full power awakening and reconstructing her body after being impaled by Omnipotus's spear. Still, the act had drained her, leaving her unconscious. She hadn't stirred since. Mark stepped closer, gazing at her. It was then that he noticed a subtle but undeniable change. He blinked, then laughed slightly. Eve's breasts were noticeably bigger. Some things never change, he thought, amused, remembering how the same thing happened to her in the comics. Mark leaned down and kissed her softly on the forehead. "Rest up, Eve," he whispered. "I'll be back soon." He turned to the nurse stationed at the door, a young woman who looked like she might faint at being addressed by the hero who just saved the world. Mark simply smiled and said, "Please keep an eye on her." The nurse nodded frantically, almost tripping over herself to assure him. Mark left the room, with Anissa quietly following, her steps almost ghost-like. The hallway barely gave them time to breathe before Cecil Stedman himself came walking up to them. "Well, hell," Cecil said, a grin tugging at his scarred face. "If you hadn't shown up when you did, the world would be ashes. Good timing." Mark shrugged modestly. "Would have arrived days later if Eve didn't call me." Cecil huffed. "Then the world owes your girlfriend a hell of a thank you." He looked past Mark at Anissa, raising an eyebrow. "So, who's the helper?" Anissa's expression shifted instantly into a scowl, her spine straightening. "I am Anissa," she said, her voice low and cold, like a sword being drawn. "Advisor to His Majesty, Emperor Mark, and his personal assistant. Not a helper, you mongrel." Mark placed a calming hand on her shoulder before she did something drastic, like rearranging Cecil's face. He smiled at Cecil and said with a playful shrug, "I wouldn't make the Scary Planet Conqueror angry if I were you." Cecil chuckled dryly. "Lucky for me, I know the Emperor." His tone then sobered quickly. "We need to talk about the Viltrumites. About what this means for Earth." Mark shook his head. "Later. I have something else to handle first." Without waiting for permission or a goodbye, Mark took off down the hall, with Anissa right behind him. Cecil watched them go and sighed heavily. Donald, ever the quiet second in command, appeared beside him with a tablet in hand. "How's that project going?" Cecil asked without looking at him. Donald tapped at the screen. "On track, sir. The creature should be restored in about 3 weeks. Robots working on it around the clock. Seems very dedicated." Cecil narrowed his eye. "Yeah. Robot's interest in that project is starting to get real suspicious. Keep an eye on him and report any odd behavior." Donald nodded. Cecil leaned in slightly, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Did you manage to retrieve any of Mark's blood from the battlefield?" Donald's expression tightened. "No, sir. We have drone footage showing Mark bleeding during the fight, but by the time we got agents on site, nothing. Not a drop." Cecil frowned. "What do you mean, nothing?" Donald showed him security footage from one of the drones. It showed a patch of the battlefield where Mark had fought, but there was no blood. It was as if it had been cleaned. Cecil cursed under his breath. God damn it. Having a blood sample would have been insurance, in case he ever stopped being one of the good guys. Donald added, "It's like the moment he was done fighting, all the evidence just disappeared." Neither of them realized how true that was. Before arriving at the GDA, Mark had used his supervision and water magi affinity to carefully pull every microscopic drop of his blood from the battlefield, gathering it midair at super speed, and then burning it all away with his fire magi abilities. He wasn't going to make the same mistake as Superman, letting some random lab cook up a nightmare version of himself. An evil clone version of himself would just be annoying. Mark and Anissa landed outside of Invincible Incorporated. Mark led the way in. "This is my home/lab/company," he said casually, his voice echoing in the wide, polished lobby. "And it'll be the future headquarters for the Viltrumites stationed on Earth." Anissa glanced around in mild amazement. The sleek corridors, the high-tech displays, and the army of Invincibots patrolling or working. The building was far more advanced than anything she had expected from Earth. Her brow furrowed. "You planned all this, even before becoming Emperor?" Mark smirked, looking over his shoulder at her. "Yeah, I was pretty confident." Anissa was awed at the pure cockiness Mark had. Finally, they reached the medical bay. The room was dimly lit. Amanda floated in a specialized chamber, suspended in a luminous green fluid. She looked peaceful, but the damage to her body was still evident. Her monstrous form had absorbed most of the trauma, but the injuries had carried over to her human side. Several Invincibots moved around the chamber, monitoring vitals, adjusting herb injectors, and checking scans. Mark approached the chamber and rested a hand against the glass. "How is she?" he asked. One of the bots responded, its voice smooth and efficient. "Her vitals are stable but weak. The damage to her neural network suggests moderate to severe brain damage. She remains in a comatose state. Magical herb infusions into the medical solution have enhanced her monster form's physical regeneration but barely and are ineffective on neurological healing." Mark frowned, his eyes lingering on Amanda's face. "So even if her body heals, which will take a long time, she might not wake up. Would Viltrumite medical technology help?" Mark asked, not taking his eyes off Amanda. Anissa hesitated. "Our technology focuses on brute force healing, making the body use its resources to heal itself," she said honestly. "Compared to your technology? I'm not sure if it would be enough, but we could try." Mark's jaw tightened. He thought it through at super speed. Amanda's monster form had borne the brunt of the injuries. Her human form had inherited the damage when she reverted. If she stayed human, her normal healing capabilities would be too slow, and she would die. But if he tried to forcibly heal her through magic, the curse tied to her monster form would resist him just like it had during the battle. He could purify her curse completely and then heal her with magic. But she would lose her powers forever. Mark sighed, his forehead leaning against the cool glass. "I can't do that to her. I know I wouldn't want someone to take my powers away." He pulled away, his mind racing with possibilities. He needed more time. He had an idea that would take some time to implement. Standing straight again, he placed his palm against the tank, a silent vow passing through his mind. "I'll make sure you wake up soon, Amanda. I promise." Anissa watched him silently. She bowed her head slightly out of respect, even though he couldn't see it. Just then, a few of the Invincibots whirred up beside them, reporting on the continued search for magical herbs and experimental recovery options they were working on. Mark nodded but didn't say much, still watching Amanda. The television flickered inside countless homes across the globe, airing the same emergency broadcast. Heroes rallied to defend the Earth against a world-devouring threat named Omnipotus. However, at the darkest hour, a mysterious new hero emerged, clad in a suit reminiscent of Omniman's, bearing the red and white colors and symbol. But clearly stronger, faster, and unlike any hero we've ever seen. The news anchor shuffled the papers nervously on his desk. "We still don't know the identity of this new champion. What we do know is, without him, Earth would likely have fallen today." Footage played showing a red and white blur clashing violently with a monstrous figure midair. Explosions rippled in the background. At Debbie Grayson's house, the volume on the TV was maxed out. Debbie sat cross-legged on her couch, gripping a pillow so tightly that her knuckles were white. She stared at the screen, tears brimming in her eyes. Not from sadness, but pride. The footage wasn't clear enough for most people to recognize the new hero. But Debbie? She knew that figure. That posture. That speed. That was her son. That was Mark. When she saw a moment where Mark punched Omnipotus so hard that the villain spiraled through the air, she jumped to her feet. "Yes, Mark," she shouted, pumping her fist into the air. "Kick his ass." The neighbors probably heard. Debbie didn't care. Her baby boy had saved the world. She was used to her husband saving the world and all, making her pretty apathetic to it. But seeing her son doing so from such a major threat brought about her motherly pride. Later, there was a knock at her door. Debbie rushed to open it and nearly knocked Mark over with a hug. She squeezed him tight, burying her face into his chest. He chuckled and returned the hug, patting her back gently. "I knew you'd win," she told him. Mark pulled back, smiling warmly. "Of course you did." Behind him, Anissa stood stiffly, arms crossed behind her back, looking every bit the soldier. She wasn't used to these family scenes. Before Mark could even introduce them, Anissa suddenly dropped to one knee, bowing low with her arm across her chest. "It is an honor to meet the mother of His Majesty, Emperor Mark," Anissa said formally, head lowered. Debbie blinked, startled. "Oh, no need for all that," she said hurriedly. "Please, get up. I'm just a mom, no bowing necessary." Anissa rose obediently, though she still looked unsure how to act. Mark grinned. "She's still learning. Earth customs are different." Debbie gave Anissa a warm, forgiving smile. "You'll pick it up fast. Welcome to Earth." Mark clapped his hands lightly. "Anyway, I actually came to check up on you, Mom. I know Dad's not here yet, and with everything that's happened, I just wanted to make sure you're okay." Debbie softened, her hands moving to cup Mark's face affectionately. "I'm fine. Now that I know you're safe." Then she stepped back, hands on her hips. "Speaking of your father, where is Nolan?" Mark shrugged casually. "I left him in charge of the Viltrumites when Eve called for me. They're en route. Should land on the moon in about 3 or 4 days." Debbie made a face. "Humph. Must be nice. Wish I could call Nolan and have him show up instantly whenever I need him to go shopping." Mark burst out laughing. "Yeah, that would be nice." His laughter faded into a more serious tone. "Mom, listen, with everything that happened, there's a good chance my identity might get leaked. A lot more people are paying attention now. I think it's safer if you stay at my place until Dad arrives." Debbie hesitated for a second but then nodded. She wasn't stupid. She had lived this life long enough to know the dangers. "I already have an emergency bag packed," she said, motioning toward the closet where a suitcase sat ready. Mark grinned, pride shining in his eyes. "That's my mom." Within minutes, Mark scooped Debbie into his arms like she weighed nothing. Anissa followed, carrying the suitcase effortlessly. They took off into the sky, streaking toward Invincible Incorporated. As they landed, Mark set Debbie down carefully. "Anissa's going to stay here with you while I finish some things," Mark said. "She's more than capable of keeping you safe." Anissa bowed slightly again. "I will guard her with my life, sire." Debbie chuckled awkwardly. "You don't have to risk your life. And Debbie is just fine." Mark gave them both a wave. "I'll be back later." And with that, he launched into the sky again, with one last stop to make. Mark landed outside Amber's house a minute later, the familiar suburban neighborhood feeling weirdly normal compared to everything else going on. Mark knocked on the door, smiling. He expected Amber. Instead, the door creaked open and revealed a middle-aged man. He was thin, had glasses perched crookedly on his nose, and had blonde hair streaked with gray. Amber's father. Mark blinked. Amber's dad blinked back. There was a long, awkward pause as the two stared at each other. For all the times Mark had been to Amber's house, he never ran into her father. Mark realized, belatedly, that he was still wearing his full Emperor uniform. The red and white colors were the same as the figure who had just been broadcast all over the news saving the world. Amber's dad's face turned pale. He wobbled. And then, thud. He fainted right there in the doorway. Mark stood frozen for a moment. "Well, shit," he muttered. He heard rapid footsteps pounding down the stairs and looked up just in time to see Amber herself. "Mark!" she shrieked, running toward him. He had all the time in the world with super speed to brace himself before she leapt into his arms, wrapping herself around him. He caught her effortlessly, his hands instinctively grabbing her. She clung to him, her arms tight around his neck, her legs curled around his waist. He laughed, planting a kiss on her lips. "I'm back," he murmured. Amber pulled back just enough to smile at him, her eyes shining. "I know. I saw you on the news. You were incredible." Then her face turned serious. "Is Eve okay?" Mark nodded, reassuring her. "She's fine. Just resting. She'll be awake in a few days." Relief washed over Amber's face. She let out a breath and then grinned mischievously. Still in his arms, she tugged at his shoulders. "Come upstairs with me. We need to talk." Mark raised an eyebrow, glancing down at her dad still unconscious at their feet. "Shouldn't we, deal with that first?" he asked, half laughing. Amber looked down briefly at her father's prone form. Then she shrugged, smirking coyly. "He'll be fine. And honestly, I'd rather he not be awake for what we're about to do." Mark felt his face flush. For all his strength and boldness, Amber could still catch him off guard like nobody else. She giggled, delighted, sensing his embarrassment. With a playful growl, he shifted her weight and carried her upstairs, her laughter echoing through the house. Down below, Mr. Bennet lay unconscious and blissfully unaware. Mark lay in bed beside Amber. Their naked bodies were tangled under the sheets. Amber curled up against Mark's bare chest, her fingers lazily tracing a line down his collarbone. Her skin was warm against his, her breath steady and relaxed. "I missed you," Amber murmured, voice soft and a little sleepy. Mark smiled, turning slightly to kiss the top of her head. "I missed you too." There was a pause, just long enough for her to soak in the moment. Then she asked, "So, how was your trip? You've been gone for like 3 weeks." Mark gave a soft shrug, eyes drifting to the ceiling. "Pretty smooth, honestly. Went out to meet with the Coalition Council. There was some talking, boring stuff at first. Then, a few Viltrumites decided to crash the meeting." Amber's eyes widened. "What happened?" Mark yawned, like he was recounting a long day at work. "We handled them. Took them down pretty easily and brought them with me to Viltrum." Amber blinked. "You went to Viltrum? What was it like?" Mark's expression softened as he recalled the alien world. "It's hard to explain. Imagine the kind of planet humans picture in sci-fi movies when they talk about utopias. It was full of advanced tech, white buildings, and pristine skies. The architecture is super clean and organized. It's kind of surreal." Amber's mouth opened in wonder. "Wow, that sounds incredible. I'd love to see it one day." Mark smiled down at her. "I'll take you. Promise." One thing he didn't tell her was that there was a ring of dead Viltrumites surrounding the entire planet. For a few seconds, they just lay there, bathed in the fading light and soft silence. But then Mark's eyes flicked to the window, and he noticed how the sun had nearly disappeared. He sighed and gave her a quick kiss on the lips. "I should get going." Amber pouted, pulling the blanket tighter around them. "Why? Just stay here." Mark chuckled. "Tempting, but your dad's still home. And let's be real, if I stayed here, I wouldn't be able to keep my hands off you. And we'd make noise." Amber laughed and nuzzled his neck. "I'd be fine with that." "I bet," he smirked, "but there's another reason. Anissa's at my house, and well, she's not exactly used to Earth yet. I trust her, but I also don't want to come home to a crater in my kitchen." Amber giggled again but then sat up, letting the blanket fall and revealing her chest. "Then let me meet her." Mark blinked. "Why?" "I want to meet her," she repeated. "I've never talked to a real alien before." Mark raised a brow. "You're literally dating an alien." Amber rolled her eyes. "You were raised here. It doesn't count." Mark stared at her for a beat, then sighed. "All right. But you're telling your dad." Amber groaned but nodded. Yeah. I guess it's about time I introduced you properly anyway." They got dressed, taking their time but eventually making their way downstairs. But when they reached the living room, they looked towards the ground. Mr. Bennet was there. Still unconscious, lying sprawled across the hardwood floor exactly where he had fainted earlier. Mark knelt and easily lifted him onto the couch like he weighed nothing. With a small puff of his cold breath, he blew over Mr. Bennet's face until the older man jolted awake, arms flailing. What the? He gasped, sitting up straight, eyes darting wildly. Dad, calm down, it's okay. Amber said, rushing over to steady him. Mark and Amber sat side by side on the couch across from him while Mr. Bennet slowly came to his senses, adjusting his glasses and squinting at Mark. He didn't say anything at first. Just stared. Mr. Bennet's eyes stayed locked on Mark longer than Mark was entirely comfortable with. He scanned him head to toe. The suit, the solid build, and the quiet composure that didn't look like it came from someone who'd literally fought a god a day ago. It was all a lot to take in. There was something about Mark that didn't just say superhero. It said something more authoritative. Like he was someone of great importance in the government. Eventually, Mr. Bennet cleared his throat and sat up a little straighter on the couch. I guess I should start with introductions. I'm George Bennet, Amber's dad. Mark smiled and extended a hand. Mark Grayson. And I'm her boyfriend. Amber glanced at her dad from the corner of her eye. She kept her hands in her lap, her knees drawn in close. She didn't say anything, but her nervousness was all over her face. George shook Mark's hand stiffly. His grip wasn't weak, but somehow it managed to not hurt him. Boyfriend, he said, repeating it to himself. It was clear he was trying to process everything. Not just the guy sitting across from him, but what that guy represented. George had watched the news. He'd seen him take on that cosmic monster that hooped the Guardians of the Globe and other heroes like they were babies. And now that same guy was here. On his couch. With his daughter. So, what's your superhero name? George awkwardly asked. Well, people usually know by the name Invincible, Mark said. You're invincible, George said slowly in awe. Mark nodded. That's right. There was a beat of silence. George looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. I've heard of you. So has everyone else. You're one of the greatest superheroes in the world. People often compare you to Omniman. Mark had to hold back a laugh at that. Being compared to his father, who almost took over the world, was ironic. George leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. I'm gonna be honest with you. This isn't easy for me. You seem like a good kid. But you're not just a kid. You're a superhero. And that scares the hell out of me. Mark nodded. I get it. Not everyone can handle having a superhero in the family. George looked down at his hands, turning them over slowly like he was staring through them. You know, my dad was a superhero. He went by President Mike. He wasn't famous. He had the ability to create weird energy guitars that could fire off sound waves when he played them. Pretty ridiculous looking back, but he meant well. I asked him one day why he became a hero, and he told me that when he got his great powers, he felt that he needed to use them with great responsibility, and his way of doing that was by putting away bad guys. Mark inwardly stiffened. Amber blinked and looked at him. You never told me that. I didn't think I needed to, George said, smiling faintly. But the thing is, it cost us everything. One day, a guy my dad put away recognized him walking around in regular clothes. No costume. Just him and my mom, grabbing groceries. Mark could tell where this was going. They both got shot. Mom survived, but she'd been in a wheelchair ever since before she passed. My dad didn't make it. I'm really sorry, Mark said. George nodded but didn't say anything right away. He looked at Mark again. You saving the world is great. I'm glad you're out there doing it. But when you're doing that, it's not you that I worry about. It's her, which is why I can't accept this relationship. Amber gently reached over and took her dad's hand. Her grip was soft but firm. Mark spoke. You're not wrong to be worried. You're right. People around me do get hurt. It's happened before. During the fight with Omnipotus. I almost lost 2 people I care about. One of them is still in a coma. I won't lie and say I'll always be around to protect Amber, but... At this pause, Mark gave off an oppressive feeling. I'll be sure to do anything to make sure she's safe and alive, even if I have to travel to the afterlife and drag her soul back. Amber's eyes teared up a bit. She leaned into Mark, resting her head against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her slowly, gently. After a few long seconds, George exhaled deeply. All right, he said. I still don't love this, George admitted, standing. But I believe you. If you say you'll protect her, I'll hold you to it. Mark stood too, his posture respectful. You have my word. Amber was already smiling through her tears. She stood up and threw her arms around Mark's neck, whispering, I love you. Mark held her close, trying not to sense her dad staring daggers at him. And just when things started to settle, Amber looked up and said, casually, I'm staying at Mark's tonight. George's calm shattered instantly and was replaced with fatherly anger. No, you're not. Dad, come on. I don't care if he saved the planet. You're not, I am, she said firmly. And I'll be fine. Eventually, George sat back down at her firm attitude and rubbed his forehead. Fine. This is what I get for spoiling you so much as a kid. Thank you, Daddy, she said, planting a kiss on his cheek. Yeah, George waved her off. Mark flew towards his home with Amber snug in his arms. When they arrived, Mark introduced Amber to Anissa and his mom as his girlfriend. Anissa already knew about him having multiple partners. But Mark's mother was shocked, as she thought Eve was his girlfriend. This brought about an awkward interaction with Mark having to explain that both were his partners. Debbie hadn't taken to that too kindly and ended up scolding him, having him kneel in front of her while yelling at him about monogamous relationships. The only way Mark could get out of the situation was by mentioning that the Viltrumites will arrive in about a day's time. Nolan stood near the viewport of the Viltrumite Imperial cruiser as it descended toward Earth's moon. He had once stood on this moon planning to conquer Earth, prepared to bring its people to heal for the glory of the Empire. Now, he was returning alongside dozens of his kind, not as an invader, but as a visitor. He'd never imagined this would be the future. His son, Mark, had done more in his short lifetime than most Viltrumites did in centuries. Nolan had lived for over 2,000 years, fought through galaxies, and toppled planets. But nothing made him feel more pride than what Mark had become. When the ship landed, Mark was already there waiting, floating with his arms crossed above the docking bay as the airlock opened for him. A meeting was called for all the Viltrumites. One by one, the Viltrumites filed into the hall under the orders of the new Emperor Mark administration. He stepped forward, addressing them with a firm voice. Things are going to be different from now on, he began. Your time on Earth won't be about conquest. It will be about learning to coexist with other species. The crowd remained silent, their attention fixed. You'll integrate into human society. That means blending in, keeping your powers hidden unless necessary to save lives. No grand displays of power. Just living like them and understanding them. A few furrowed their brows. Others glanced at each other, visibly unsure. You'll take on human identities, live among the population, and you'll need to find mates. That's how we'll rebuild our numbers. There will be quarterly check-ins. If needed, I'll provide jobs, housing, and funds through my company to help you adjust. Once you've confirmed impregnation with your partner, you can come to Invincible Incorporated, where the child will be chipped and you can decide to raise the child, however you like, until they gain their powers. They'll be trained on Viltrum to control their powers when the time comes so they don't endanger the world we're trying to protect. When they have good control over their powers, they'll be allowed to stay on whichever planet they choose. There was some hesitation among the crowd, especially from the older ones. Thrag stood with his arms crossed, a scowl etched deep into his face. Conquest stood beside him, quiet but clearly displeased. Mark knew Thrag wouldn't openly object. Not anymore. He'd been dethroned, and his strength was not enough to challenge Mark's rule. Still, that bitterness was there. Mark could feel it like heat from a distant fire. Thrag clenched his jaw. Inwardly, he cursed Mark 1,000 times over. His reign as Grand Regent had ended in defeat, yet he lived, and now he was just another one of Mark's advisors. A soldier with a title, nothing more. The humiliation was sharp, but he held his tongue. For now. Mark turned back to the assembly. Cause trouble, and you'll be punished. Hurt a human, and you'll answer to me directly. Detain if it's necessary and with restraint. However, if the reason behind hurting a human is reasonable, like self-defense, then there will be no punishment, but your actions will be judged if self-defense was needed. At the end of his speech, he distributed prepaid cards, each loaded with $100,000, to help them settle in. A practical gift, but also a message. This wasn't just an assignment. It was a new lifestyle that they'll have to adjust to. After the meeting, Mark and Nolan stood off to the side. "I hope this works," Nolan said quietly. Mark nodded. "I'm not saying it'll be smooth, but Earth changed you, so I think it can change them too." Inwardly, Mark thought about how easily the Viltrumites had accepted Earth in the comics. But real life wasn't a comic. Things were messy here. He added, "I've also left a team back on the ship to monitor all the Viltrumites. They'll make sure nothing crazy happens while they're blending in. Plus, the quarterly check-ins will help us catch anything early." Just then, Nolan's communicator chirped. A familiar voice came through the feed. "Nolan, are you back on Earth yet?" Nolan responds. "Oh, Cecil," leaning in to whisper to Mark, "by the way, see if you can get this tracker off my shoulder. I already protect the world anyway. I don't need Cecil over my shoulder telling me how to do it." Mark thought it over. "Yeah, I mean the punishment is kind of useless, because you already work with him. I'll try and work things out." Cecil's voice cut through again. "We've got some things to talk about. Meet me at the GDA." Mark spoke through his own communicator. "Actually, that works out. I was planning to meet with him anyway. We need to talk about Earth's future, and the Viltrumites." Nolan tapped his chin. "Might want to talk to him about documentation, too. Back when I first arrived, I had to get the GDA's help just to exist on paper." Mark chuckled. Noted. GDA headquarters. Walking in, Mark noticed Cecil looked much better and less stressed than the last time he saw him. "You sure took your time," Cecil muttered when Mark and Nolan entered. Mark gave him a calm nod. "You look way better than the last time I saw you. What's your secret?" With a deadpan voice, "I sit in a tub of goop for 30 minutes and it re-energizes me." Mark laughed, but he vaguely remembered something like that from the comics. Cecil then dove right into the topic at hand. "First, you're aware of your newfound fame? Well, we've been trying to cover it up, but your appearance during the Omnipotus fight wasn't subtle. The whole world saw a guy in red and white punch a reality-warping god into the stratosphere before we could block the news. I'm fine with them connecting that to my invincible identity," Mark replied. "Just not to Mark Grayson. My mom's still got a house. I'd like to keep it private." Cecil waved a hand. "Fine, we've been scrubbing footage, filtering interviews, and even paying off a few news anchors so we can make it so that you are identified strictly as Invincible and not Mark Grayson." Now moving on to the second topic, reports are flying in from every continent. Multiple unidentified objects entered Earth's atmosphere about an hour ago. Dozens of them were moving so fast that we lost track of them. You wouldn't know anything about that, seeing as you guys were on the moon, would you? Mark responded. "Those are the Viltrumites that I've led here." Cecil stared at him like he hadn't heard correctly. "You brought them here? Without even giving us a heads up?" Mark calmly says, "Well, it's not like I'd come back without them. Plus, I want them to experience Earth life so they can change their mindsets when it comes to other species." Cecil irritated, "You just introduced a species that can squash humans like bugs into the general population, with no warnings to protect ourselves." Mark crosses his arms and has a stern expression. "I know, but I'm their emperor now, and I've ensured that the Viltrumites will behave properly while on Earth. They'll even save human lives if able." "So what's the plan?" Cecil finally asked. "They just hang around, punch criminals, and go on Tinder dates?" "They're not here to play superhero," Mark said. "They're mainly here to start families and gain emotional maturity." Cecil sat back in his chair, tapping the table with a finger. "All right. Let's hear it. What does this alliance look like?" Mark nodded. "Simple. Earth will let the Viltrumites live here. They integrate into society and start families. In exchange, we offer Earth access to our technology, which helps with cleaner forms of energy, helps with increasing the number of natural resources, and even restores the atmosphere to combat global warming. We're talking a cure for climate change, food shortages, maybe even space exploration." Donald glanced up from his notepad at that, didn't even know he was here. We'll also promise to return to Viltrum in a few generations, once our numbers reach a satisfactory level. But for now, Earth is our refuge." Cecil narrowed his eyes. "And you can guarantee they won't go rogue? No massacres? No coup attempts?" "I can," Mark said. "Because they're following me. And I'll hold them accountable even if I need to kill them." Cecil was quiet for a moment. Then, "And the humans involved with them? The partners, the children?" Mark nodded. "They get essentially dual citizenship. Freedom to visit either planet. Full protections under both governments." "And the kids?" Cecil asked sharply. "You're talking about god-level toddlers born to humans. What happens when they start throwing trucks in preschool?" "We'll track their development using standard Viltrumite trackers when they are born. When their powers emerge, we move them to Viltrum for training and education. Taught how to control their strength before being able to return if they want." Cecil's expression remained skeptical, but he was listening. Donald continued scribbling notes. "And if they don't want to stay on Viltrum?" "They'll have that choice once they're trained," Mark replied. Cecil sighed, glancing at Donald. "This is a hell of a proposal." "It's not a proposal," Mark corrected gently. "It's a solution. One that benefits both sides. Besides, it's not like you can refuse, as it's already happening. Better to take advantage of the opportunities." Donald looked up. "You said these children would be tracked. How?" Mark hesitated only briefly. "Harmless trackers that will be embedded at birth. They're already standard procedure on Viltrum, since they need a way to keep track of their people that are capable of flying through space." Cecil mulled that over. "And if someone decides to weaponize one of these kids? Raise them to hate humans?" Mark's face was serious. "Then I'll deal with them." That seemed to satisfy Cecil more than any contract ever could. 10 hours later, the treaty was drafted. Terms were laid out. Conditions were reviewed. Exceptions were made, like Nolan's punishment, and contingency plans were debated. When the last page was written, Mark and Cecil stood up and shook hands. "You're a hell of a politician," Cecil said. "You know that." Mark grinned. "I had to read a lot." They left the meeting room in silence, and the beginning of an era was forged. While Mark and Nolan were moving towards the exit, Mark turned around. "I'm gonna check on Eve. Mom's at my house, so you could fly there." Before he started walking towards her room. The halls of the GDA were quiet this late, lit only by the soft hum of overhead fluorescence. Mark moved briskly past nurses and agents until he reached a familiar door. He pushed it open gently. Inside, Eve sat upright in bed, and her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Mark," she said softly with a smile. He smiled. "Hey, gorgeous." But the warmth of the moment was immediately undercut by the presence of two other people in the room. Eve's parents. Her mother sat beside the bed, looking tired and worried. Her father, on the other hand, stood stiffly near the wall, arms folded, disapproval etched across every inch of his face. Mark gave a polite nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins." Eve's dad didn't return it. Instead, he turned toward his daughter, voice already raised. "I told you this job was too dangerous. And now look at you. You almost died." "Dad," Eve groaned, rubbing her temples. "Not now. You should quit and focus on finding a stable husband and having kids." Mark raised an eyebrow. "I'd be pretty heartbroken if she went and got a husband while she's still dating me." The silence in the room was immediate and thick. Eve's dad blinked, clearly realizing who had just spoken. He stammered. "You're that guy. The one on TV." Mark just nodded. "Mark Grayson. Superhero. And Eve's boyfriend." Eve smiled faintly at the introduction, but her father's face darkened again. "We'd like some privacy," he said, stepping toward Mark. Mark merely walked past the Mun, ignoring him, and approached Eve's bedside, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "You okay?" "I'm fine," she whispered. "I was just exhausted." Eve's father exploded. "I don't care who you are. She's my daughter, and I have a right to speak to her without being interrupted by some stranger." Mark didn't raise his voice, but his tone dropped cold. I'm not some stranger. I'm her partner. You know, the one who didn't walk away when she needed support. Eve's dad clenched his jaw. She shouldn't be doing this in the first place. She's not cut out for it. She should have stayed home, like I said, instead of running around in a skimpy suit pretending to be a hero. That was it. Mark's anger appeared. You need to shut the hell up, he said, eyes narrowing. You think she's not cut out for it? She just helped save the world. She was inches from death, and you're worried about the way she dresses. Eve's father tried to cut in, but Mark wasn't done. Mark said plainly, I'm not going to stand here and let you pretend your outdated 1950s worldview is somehow right. I won't let you talk to my Eve like that, especially when she'll be an important figure remembered far into the future, while you'll be an old man all by yourself with no one to visit you since you pushed your daughter away. Mark then looked at Eve's mom. And you need to stop feeding into his ego by being so submissive and actually stand up for yourself and for your daughter. How are you supposed to be an example for your daughter with the way you act? Either get it together yourself or come and ask us for help. The room was silent again. Eve's mother looked visibly torn, her hands clenched together in her lap. Her father, red-faced and seething, finally growled, Come on. We're leaving. He didn't even look at Eve as he turned toward the door. Her mother hesitated a second longer, then followed. Mark stood still, waiting for the door to shut. Then he sat down beside a tearful Eve and gently took her hand. I'm sorry for that, he said. Eve shook her head. Don't be. They were always like that. You just got through to them better than I could. She wiped her eyes, but her smile was sincere. I love you, she said. Mark leaned in, kissed her forehead, and whispered, I love you too. Eve's grin returned with a mischievous edge. Now get in this bed before the nurse comes back. Mark smiled. He slipped off his boots and crawled gently onto the bed beside her. Eve slid into his arms immediately, her head resting on his shoulder. The hospital blanket barely covered the both of them, but they didn't care. Eve's fingertips traced lazy circles on his chest through the fabric of his shirt, and Mark felt himself relax. She smiled and leaned up to kiss him. It was a very intimate kiss. Eve's fingers slid up into his hair, and Mark wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer. She moved on instinct, swinging one leg over him so she straddled his waist, the blanket slipping further. She pulled down Mark's pants and then removed her own before hovering right over Mark's meat. They both froze when they heard a soft gasp. Both of them turned to see a nurse frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. A thick silence filled the room. Mark opened his mouth. The nurse flushed bright red and quickly turned around, closing the door behind her with a thud. They could still hear her heels echoing as she walked off in a rush down the hallway. The nurse inwardly thought, he's so big. Eve laughed a little. Mark groaned. Man, I should have heard her coming. She looked into it, Eve giggled. Did you see the look on her face? She was blushing all the way to her ears, Mark muttered. Eve lowered her waist, inserting Mark into herself, while moaning. MNNN. Well, maybe we should give her something to really talk about. Mark groaned. You are a menace. She grinned. You love it. Giving him a kiss. I really do. Mark and Eve soared in the sky, side by side, Eve's cape and Mark's return cloak trailing gently in the wind as they returned home to the Invincible Incorporated penthouse. So, Eve said, glancing at him, what's the plan now, Emperor? Mark let out a breath, chuckling. Honestly? Not much for now. Most of the Viltrumites are incognito and blending in. I won't need to worry about them for another 3 months when it's time for check-ins. Eve said, coasting a little closer. So no Imperial duties or threats for a while. Hopefully, Mark replied. Until then, I'll focus on helping Amanda recover, help Anissa adapt to Earth, go back to hero patrols, and maybe help rebuild Chicago a bit. You know, the usual. Eve commented. That's a lot. But I hope you didn't forget the most important thing. What's that? Spending time with your girlfriends. Her tone was playful, but there was a note of sincerity behind it. Mark grinned and dipped slightly in the air, floating beneath her to steal a quick kiss. Never forget. That's always priority number one. Eve's eyes twinkled mischievously. And by girlfriends, you mean me and Amber, right? Or, are we counting Anissa now too? Mark didn't shy away. Anissa's made her intentions pretty clear. She wants to be by my side, and honestly, I don't see a future where she's not. So yeah, she counts. Eve blew a raspberry. Wow. Another one. You're way too nonchalant about this, you know that? I thought I could get you flustered at the very least. Mark laughed. I already know better than to get too arrogant about this subject. I don't want to lose you or Amber. I'm not just collecting dozens of partners. I'm only considering those I can really see a future with. Eve replied, half amused. Just don't go over 7. 7 girlfriends max, she said, completely serious. And I still expect some one-on-one time. Mark gave her a faux salute. Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure each of you gets proper attention. Eve smirked, then surged forward. Good. Now let's race home. Without waiting, she shot ahead, pink energy flaring around her. Mark grinned, letting her get a head start before following at a casual pace. He could have overtaken her easily, but he didn't. Usually, when they fly together, he has a speed limit that's closer to her max speed so she can reach home first. Plus, he liked watching her win sometimes, especially when he's trailing behind her and can use his X-ray and supervision, wink wink. Days passed. At the top floor of Invincible Incorporated, Mark stood in the medical lab, sleeves rolled up, hands moving with precision as he examined glowing herbs suspended in green fluid. Amanda floated in a transparent medical pod behind him, her monster form still wrapped in the green medical fluid. She hadn't moved in days ever since she entered her coma. Mark gritted his teeth and turned back to his workstation. The table was covered in materials he had gathered from all over Earth. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. This isn't enough. His Kryptonian medical knowledge was vast but limited. It didn't include illnesses and injuries that were magical in nature. His Kryptonian healing magic should have been able to handle this. But the curse that gave her powers was magical in origin. And it fought back against his own magic. He stood there a moment longer, then whispered, I'm going to go with the idea I had earlier and it'll change you. But I'll make sure you fully recover. Mark lifted his hand as a green energy surged through it. The air shimmered, twisting space in a tight circle until it opened, a swirling green portal hovering in the air. He hadn't used Angstrom Levy's power much. Not beyond the small tests that he did to get used to the ability, and the last time he used it was to bring Angstrom to a different dimension. Flashback before Mark left for space. Levy blinked, confused and weary. Where are we? The two were currently in a wide grass field, just outside a city. Call it Earth minus, Mark replied. No aliens, no superpowers, and no magic. You're still you here, but better. You're extremely rich and respected as one of the smartest people on the planet. Angstrom's brows furrowed. Why did you bring me here? Mark said. It's kinda of a thank you for your powers. Besides, you wanted peace, right? This world is very peaceful. Levy didn't move, having knelt in the grass with a hopeless expression. I didn't ask you to take my power, Grayson. I didn't exactly have a choice, Mark said, scratching the back of his head. Look at this. Mark opened a portal showing a version of their Earth. Canon Angstrom was holding Canon Debbie and Canon Oliver hostage as Canon Invincible struggled, bloodied and exhausted. He then opened another portal where Angstrom was monologuing as evil versions of Invincible slaughtered innocents, the skies full of carnage and collapsing cities. You see, Mark said. That's where you were heading. Levy collapsed completely, sobbing into the dirt. I'm not like them. True. You probably would have been different. But I am a selfish person and your abilities were something I wanted. Please, give it back. Mark stepped through the portal. It closed behind him, leaving Levy to stare at the sky of his new world, silent, broken, and filled with growing rage. Flashback end. Stepping through the portal, Mark stepped into a quiet hospital room. The woman in the bed was unconscious, her brown hair was messy, and her breathing was normal. Machines beeped around her in a steady rhythm. The woman in the bed was a lawyer who got shot for exposing a crime boss called Nicholas Trask. She was also the cousin to one of the strongest there is. This woman was Jennifer Walters, better known in the future as SHE Hulk. Bruce Banner had already been here. He had done the transfusion and ran away due to incoming authorities. Mark stood at the foot of her bed. He was currently in awe of meeting a big Marvel figure. She still looked fragile. But he put that awe to the side. "I'm sorry for this," Mark said softly, pulling a sterile syringe from his belt. He moved gently, drawing a vial of blood from her arm. She didn't wake. Mark stepped back just as distant footsteps echoed from the hallway. Time to go. He opened another portal, slipping through it. No one even knew he'd been there, allowing for events that were supposed to happen to naturally happen. Now back in his lab, the green portal closed. Mark held the vial in his gloved hand, staring at it. Let's see if gamma-radiated blood and Kryptonian bioengineering can save a monster girl. He turned toward Amanda's pod, the faintest smile crossing his lips. You're going to be one of the strongest there is. Back at Guardians HQ, inside a dimly lit private chamber sealed from outside interference, Robot activated a dozen floating screens filled with diagnostics and video feeds. The drone was being guided remotely as usual, every action an extension of the brilliant and now fractured mind of Rudy Connors, safely encased in a nutrient tank elsewhere, far from public sight. Rudy's mindset was in a downward spiral. Amanda had been injured. Badly. And it hadn't been him who saved her, it had been Invincible. During the battle with Omnipotus, the drone had made its way toward her unconscious body. It had tried to call out to Invincible, to plead to be taken along. But its voice module had been damaged in the fight, and no words came. Invincible hadn't even acknowledged it. He simply picked Amanda up with his powers and flew off, leaving Robot behind like an obsolete tool. In the days since, that moment had played over and over again in Rudy's mind on repeat. What might have been sadness and worry festered into frustration, then obsession. Now, through his creation, Rudy had begun to act, not as a scientist, not as a strategist, but as something more dangerous, a genius with a personal vendetta cloaked in irrationality. While the reanimated Depth Dweller remained locked away in a GDA biocontainment vault under Cecil's orders, especially with the new alliance he had with the Viltrumites, Robot had managed to intercept its audio. The creature's screech, one that had proved oddly effective against both Invincible and Omni-Man, was digitized and stored. He didn't need the monster. He had the sound. A new window opened on one of the computer's terminals, displaying a topographical map with a blinking red dot. It was one of the Viltrumites who had recently gone incognito on Earth, blending in with the population per Emperor Mark's new integration order. Robot had found him, barely. Even with advanced surveillance, this one had taken time to locate. On screen, the drone reviewed grainy but stabilizing footage, a Mun with a thick mustache, flannel shirt, and jeans chopping wood in the middle of a dense winter forest. To most, it looked like any lumberjack. But the readers knew better. This Mun was Thrag. Robot didn't know his true identity. Not yet. To him, this was simply a test subject, a powerful Viltrumite isolated from others, perfect to attain his blood. Robot's mechanical eyes narrowed as it saved the footage and quietly began drafting an engagement protocol. Rudy wasn't ready to confront Mark yet. However, since he couldn't get a sample from Mark, this hidden Viltrumite would do. Mark stood in his lab within the dimension of solitude around shelves that were filled with books he had collected from all over his Earth and alternate Earths from the Marvel Universe. He had been bouncing back and forth between Earth and this isolated dimension for weeks now, collecting books on gamma radiation, building medical devices to aid his tests, and studying the blood sample he'd carefully taken from Jennifer Walters. While he was studying Jennifer's blood, he began contemplating giving it to Amanda. Jennifer's blood was filled with radiation and Mark began to fear that it would just give Amanda cancer and kill her, without the true source of a Hulk's power being present in their universe. The one below all Mark had no idea if Amanda would be able to become a Hulk using Jennifer's blood without the one below all being present in their universe. So he had to conduct some more tests to see if becoming a Hulk was possible without the one below all's power. To determine this, Mark traveled to many different universes in the Marvel multiverse to acquire more blood samples from not only Jennifer Walters but also Bruce Banner. He acquired samples of her blood before and after becoming She-Hulk and did the same for Bruce Banner. However, it seemed as though many versions of Hulk were vigilant and seemed to always be on edge, leading to him even having to fight one in order to obtain a proper blood sample. Still, his efforts had paid off. Through careful testing, he discovered that both Jennifer and Bruce possessed a unique genetic trait that allowed their bodies to process and survive gamma radiation in ways others couldn't, but only when there were extremely large amounts of gamma radiation could they turn into a Hulk. So, he didn't have anything to fear with the one below all. Now, all he had to do was recreate that same genetic trait in Amanda. Safely. Before anything else, though, he had to return her to her real self. Mark stepped in front of the medical pod and pressed his palm to the glass. His eyes glowed faintly as he called on one of his Air Magi abilities, Purification. Soft green energy flowed from his hand and enveloped Amanda's monstrous form, gently peeling away the layers of cursed magic clinging to her DNA. Her form shimmered. The monstrous exterior began to fade away like smoke. Her muscles relaxed. The giant hands shrank. What was left was Amanda, the real Amanda, her 24-year-old self, floating unconscious and uncursed. The monitors in her chamber flared red as her body began to register the full extent of her injuries again. Her limbs twitched. Her brow furrowed in pain. Mark calmly kept his hands on the glass and channeled his Kryptonian water Magi healing. The green medicinal liquid filled in the pod glowed a neon color, and her vitals began to stabilize. The curse was gone and now she was fully recovered. He sighed in relief, a weight lifting off his shoulders. She would still be out for a while, but her body was finally healed. Her mind, fractured by pain and trauma, would take more time. Looking at her, Mark noticed the outfit she wore before transforming had returned. He didn't hesitate. With the efficiency of a field medic, he gently removed the torn remnants and dressed her in a plain, dark blue bathing suit to preserve her modesty. No awkwardness, no lust. Just duty and care. A knock echoed from the lab's entrance. "Come in," he called without turning. The doors slid open with a gentle hiss. Anissa entered, dressed in jeans, a loose blouse, and flats. An outfit she wouldn't have usually worn before her almost 2 months on this planet. Earth was really rubbing off on her. "You never told me she looked like this," Anissa said, glancing at Amanda. "I just thought you had some peculiar tastes." Mark snorted a laugh. "That's her real form. I removed the curse that was placed on her, so she returned to who she actually is." Anissa tilted her head, taking a better look. "She's beautiful." "She is," Mark agreed, almost absently. Anissa moved closer to him. "I can't wait until we can share you," she said playfully, running a hand down his arm. Mark didn't mind her flirtations. Over the last month and a half, they had gone on a few dates. He'd helped her understand Earth, helped her loosen up, and she, in turn, had shown him an emerging new side beneath her hardened shell. They'd kissed once or twice. Actually, they've kissed multiple times. But he hadn't made anything official. "You'll just have to wait until I talk to Amanda," Mark said. "I need to get her answer about the confession I made before leaving for Telescria. It's only fair." Anissa nodded. "Ah. So it's a matter of placement." That wasn't how he would have put it, but it worked. He let it slide. She leaned in and kissed him, her lips lingering with heat and a hunger she didn't bother to hide. "I really can't wait until the day comes." Then she winked and turned to leave. "I'm off to find Amber or Eve. They promised to show me how to make those croissants I love." Mark watched her go, a smirk tugging at his lips. "I hate to see her go, but I love to see her walk away." When the door slid shut, he turned back to Amanda. She floated peacefully now, her breathing even. All that was left was to give her the She-Hulk's blood mixed with one of the serums he's made. During his time in his dimension of solitude, Mark had always known his hybrid DNA was unique, but he managed to create the miracle that was himself on his own terms. 2 serums sat in cold stasis beside him, one for humans, one for Viltrumites. The challenge hadn't been simple. While using the data stored in his blood from the Codex, Mark managed to easily make a serum that'll turn a human who drinks it into a Kryptonian and grant them the standard Kryptonian abilities. Whereas, making a serum that'll grant Viltrumites Kryptonian abilities was more challenging. Viltrumite physiology, thanks to their smart atoms, resisted unnatural genetic alteration with ferocity. Their bodies were nearly impervious to force changes, especially after centuries of their smart atoms getting used to how they were constructed. Meaning, although smart atoms are known to adapt to different environmental stressors, they still follow a certain blueprint of how a Viltrumite is constructed, causing them to be rigid and reject unnatural changes to this blueprint. Mark, however, had both Viltrumite and Kryptonian DNA awaken simultaneously, letting the two merge and strengthen each other. The others wouldn't be so lucky, since their Viltrumite DNA would try to reject the Kryptonian DNA. So, he had to construct this serum to bypass the smart atoms' resistance and merge seamlessly with a Viltrumite's DNA. After a couple of days in his dimension of solitude, he had done it. Luckily, he had no need for sleep, so he worked 24/7 until he finally perfected the serum that will turn a Viltrumite into a Viltrumite-Kryptonian hybrid. He named the two serums, with the human Kryptonian serum being called Compound HK and the Viltrumite-Kryptonian serum being called Compound VK. Both were synthesized from his own blood, meaning anyone who took them would inherit his resistance to both species' natural weaknesses. More importantly, they'd eventually adapt to those weaknesses entirely with enough exposure, rendering them obsolete. Before mixing Jennifer's blood with Compound HK and giving it to Amanda, Mark had two things to do. And the first was to translate the genetic trait both Bruce and Jennifer had into Amanda's DNA. To do so, Mark brought Amanda to his dimension of solitude in order to use a device he had previously made. The gene infusion device, the same one he had once used to integrate Angstrom-Levy's dimensional ability into himself. He had spent months upgrading it, making sure it wouldn't cause pain or stress to Amanda's body like it did for him. Carefully, he lifted Amanda from her chamber and placed her into the smaller infusion pod. With practiced movements, he inserted the gene solution based on Jennifer Walters' blood into the device, locked it, and initiated the sequence. A soft hum filled the chamber. Amanda's body glowed faintly, her cells shifting on a microscopic level. Mark watched the monitors carefully. No rejection. No immune response. It was working. After an hour, the procedure was complete. He returned her to her main chamber and watched her vitals steady again. Amanda was stable and had the same trait that both Bruce and Jennifer had. Now, it was time for the final step. The testing phase. While he knew both of his serums should work, he needed to test them on a human and a Viltrumite to not risk his family's lives. "I need test subjects." The words hung in the air like a verdict. He knew what that meant. The ethical line he was about to cross wouldn't stop him. It was like he told Levy, he is a selfish person. Waving his hand, two green portals opened into alternate realities. Out of the portals came two figures. One was a version of D.A. Sinclair, nearly identical to the one from his world, save for a shaved head and being a lot more detached in regard to human lives. The other, a version of Thrag, still arrogant, still powerful, cloaked in a regal garment that looked like Battle Beast, a trophy of his conquest. From the left portal, Sinclair came tumbling out with a yelp, hitting the ground with a graceless flop. What the hell? From the right, Thrag floated out with practiced control, arms crossed as his sharp eyes scanned the red plane of Mark's dimension. "Where am I?" Thrag demanded, eyes narrowing. "Where is my army of children?" Sinclair, brushing dust off his pants, snapped, "I demand to know who's responsible for this abduction." "I was on the verge of capturing this red-haired superhero wearing pin." Mark pinched the bridge of his nose. Yeah, we're skipping introductions." Before either man could say more, Mark vanished. To Sinclair's eyes, Mark simply blurred. To Thrag, it was like a ghost had struck him. One moment, Mark stood across the field. The next, his fist was embedded in Thrag's torso. The Viltrumite's eyes went wide. He coughed violently, blood sputtering from his lips as he tried to look down and process the gaping wound. Mark didn't wait. He yanked his arm back and slammed an elbow against Thrag's temple, sending him spiraling to the crimson ground, unconscious and twitching. Sinclair stared in disbelief, his jaw hanging open. What did you just kill?" Mark appeared behind him and flicked his forehead with casual precision. The force was enough to knock Sinclair out cold. He crouched beside them, pulling out vials from his pocket. Compound HK for Sinclair and Compound VK for Thrag. He injected each serum into its respective target. As the fluid disappeared into their veins, he picked up both unconscious bodies with ease and began carrying them across the plain. Several minutes later, he arrived at his lab, where two large solar pods lined with yellow sun simulation panels were built by his Invincibots. They were perfect for supercharging a Kryptonian's abilities. He took several minutes to arrive in order to allow the serum to be fully integrated into their bodies. He laid Thrag and Sinclair inside separate pods, secured them, and activated the sequence. Bright yellow sunlight flooded the chambers, bathing the unconscious test subjects in pure solar energy. It would take time, but Mark was patient. The results had to be clear before he dared even think about using the serums on anyone close to him. For the next month, Mark monitored them carefully. Sinclair's body began to change quickly. His muscles thickened, his bone density increased, and a bioelectric aura started to radiate from his skin. These were telltale signs of a Kryptonian awakening their powers. His vitals showed no side effects and that there was no rejection. Thrag, on the other hand, took like 2 days longer. The VK serum was more complex. His smart atoms resisted at first, violently. But the serum was designed for exactly this. Bit by bit, the Kryptonian DNA merged with his Viltrumite cells. The results were promising. What should have taken Thrag 3 months to fully recover from Mark's earlier assault only took 1. Mark stood outside the pods, reading the final reports. Bioelectric aura, solar absorption, accelerated healing. He nodded to himself, heart hammering. "It works," he whispered. "It actually works." He hovered his hand over the release switches. He pressed both. Oops, maybe I should have woken them one at a time. The pods hissed open with mechanical precision. Steam poured out. Both men stirred. Sinclair groaned, floating slightly above the ground, blinking in awe at his body's new capabilities. Thrag opened his eyes and locked onto Mark. His body shot forward like a missile. Shit. Definitely should have woken them up one at a time. Mark barely had time to brace before Thrag tackled him with the fury of a freight train, smashing him through 3 reinforced lab walls. The momentum didn't stop. They shot out of the structure and into the crimson sky of the wasteland beyond. Mark twisted mid-flight, planted his feet against Thrag's chest, and launched him across the red plains, sending him crashing through rocky terrain like a meteor. "Guess we're doing this again." He glanced back toward the hole in the lab's wall, using his X-ray vision to find Sinclair still floating, disoriented and trying not to crash into a support beam. "Invincibots," Mark called out. "Contain Subject A. Engage if it tries to flee." The bots zipped out in a swarm, surrounding Sinclair with force fields. Mark clenched his fists, eyes glowing red as he flew off after Thrag. He even had a grin and feeling of excitement at the thought of facing a Kryptonian Thrag. The world came back to Thrag in blinding waves of color and sound. His body lay half-buried under collapsed stone pillars, jagged slabs of red rock crumbling off his shoulders as he rose to his feet. Pain and heat throbbed behind his eyes, but it was nothing compared to what hit him next. Everything was loud. He heard the crackling hum of machines from Mark's base. He could hear his own heartbeat pounding like a drum against his eardrums. Worse, his eyes refused to focus properly. The world bent at strange angles. He could see through things. Through the stone. Through his own hands. He blinked rapidly, clutching his ears and growling through clenched teeth. What is this? His instincts screamed, but centuries of control kicked in. Breathing deeply, he fought to steady himself, reeling his senses back in. It took time, but he did it. His vision stabilized, and the auditory overload dimmed into a background hum like construction noise, irritating but tolerable. Then he saw him. Mark Grayson was standing at the edge of the canyon with a maddeningly calm expression on his face. "You," Thrag spat. "Mark Grayson. For years. It's been nearly 4 years since you vanished." Mark's eyes narrowed slightly, but he said nothing. He thinks that Thrag must have been confusing him with the Mark from his dimension. Thinking about it now, that Mark must have been in his time skip era. He'll have to stop by and maybe help that Mark out. Thrag squinted. "You're different." His tone was suspicious. "What did you do to me? When you injected me, what the hell was that?" Mark's voice was cool, even casual. "I just gave you an upgrade and made you stronger, faster, and more durable." Thrag's face twisted in fury. "You didn't answer the question. What did you give me?" "And I don't plan to," Mark replied flatly. "You don't need to know what you've been given." Thrag's hands clenched into fists. His instincts screamed danger as he looked at Mark, but there was something else, a creeping awareness of newfound strength pulsing in his muscles. He indeed did feel stronger, like Mark said. But also, weird. Why? He demanded. Why do I need more strength? Mark gave a faint shrug, brushing dust off his shoulder. I needed a test subject, and you're tough. I didn't want to potentially waste the serum on a weak Viltrumite. He didn't mention that he could have picked any random soldier. No, he wanted Thrag, at least an evil version of his Thrag that was still at the peak of his pride and confidence. Someone who could actually push him, and he wouldn't have any problem killing. Mark smiled faintly at that thought. His life had become boring. Too easy. His powers eclipsed everything. Things that would usually get a human's heart pumping didn't even get him to breathe quicker than normal. But fighting? Fighting still gave him that spark. That high. That sense of excitement. Maybe it was the Viltrumite in him. Hell, maybe he reincarnated as a scion instead of a Viltrumite Kryptonian. Thrag's sharp eyes scanned Mark from head to toe and locked onto the familiar outfit trimmed with regal crimson. The Viltrumite Empire's imperial garb. His garb. His expression turned even angrier. Why are you wearing that? Mark blinked, then looked down at himself. Oh, right. He chuckled. Well, to put it simply, this is a different universe and here I took over the throne after handing you your butt. Thrag stared. He looked like he couldn't decide whether to attack or laugh. You expect me to believe, you don't have to, Mark interrupted. Let's just start fighting already. Or should I just kill you now? That was the last straw. With a roar, Thrag launched himself forward, throwing a punch that shattered the sound barrier. Mark raised his arm and blocked it with a grunt. Their limbs collided like meteors. Mark responded with a punch of his own, aimed straight at Thrag's head. Thrag twisted, blocking with his forearm, and for a second they hovered there, locked in midair, the force of their clash shaking the canyon walls. Then the sky exploded. They moved too fast for the naked eye, trading blows across the air like titans in a storm. Every punch split the air. Every dodge sent ripples through the clouds. The mountain range cracked and splintered beneath them, the sheer force of their movements displacing thousands of tons of rock. Mark felt the strain. Thrag was maybe 80% of his current strength, but he was experienced, and brutally so. Every move was precise, refined by centuries of war. For every blow Mark landed, Thrag countered with a smarter one. It was exhilarating. They separated midair, both landing on the broken ground below. Mark touched his side, seeing that it was bruised. He may have even had cracked ribs. He tasted blood. Thrag didn't look much better. He had one eye swollen, and his shoulder was slightly dislocated. Where have you been? Thrag growled. All this time. And what was in that injection? Is that what gave you this power? Mark sighed. I already told you I'm not your Mark. I'm from another universe. Thrag didn't believe him at all. But he was too furious to care. Mark cracked his neck and stepped forward. Enough talk. He launched forward and drove a punch into Thrag's jaw. Thrag snarled and countered, slamming a fist into Mark's ribs. Something gave way. Mark gasped, but he returned the favor with a brutal elbow to Thrag's collarbone. Bone cracked. Thrag screamed. The fight descended into savagery. Grace gave way to fury. They headbutt each other like beasts, broke bones, and tore flesh. Blood coated their hands. At some point, the noble battle turned into a brawl between two beasts. Mark's grin never faded. This was the thrill he'd missed. The feeling of his blood pumping was exhilarating. He understands Battle Beast more now. He should set up sparring matches with Battle Beast, but should remove Battle Beast's curse as well. Thrag was no longer thinking about capturing Mark. He was fighting to live. And losing. Mark stepped back, breathing heavily, wiping blood from his lips. He stared across at Thrag, who was hunched over, breathing heavily as well. I've been fighting like a Viltrumite, Mark said, voice low. Thrag frowned. Mark's eyes glowed red. Time to fight like a Kryptonian. He fired his heat vision. The twin beams smashed into Thrag's chest, searing through his suit and torching his skin. Thrag cried out, flipping through the air and crashing into the rock. What was that? He shouted, smoking and stunned. Mark didn't answer. He appeared in front of Thrag in an instant, driving a fist into his face and following up with another blast of heat vision straight to the eyes. Thrag screamed, flailing. He swung wildly, but Mark ducked and landed a brutal headbutt that caved in Thrag's nose. The battle dragged into a lava-filled cavern deep beneath the mountain. The heat licked at their skin, but it wasn't hot enough to damage them. Mark landed, catching his breath, when he suddenly took a direct hit to the chest. Thrag's eyes glowed. He had heat vision now, too. "I see, you gave me the same thing that made you so strong," he sneered. "Well now, I'll use that strength to make sure you stay dead." Mark throws a fireball directly into Thrag's chest. The magical flames engulfed him. He screamed as his skin blistered. Magic. While Mark's serum provided those who received it his resistances to certain weaknesses that he's developed since he got his powers, they weren't as strong as his own resistances. Especially since he didn't incorporate the Kryptonian Magi gene in the serum. Rage-filled and scorched, Thrag charged again. They collided in a blur of red and white. Thrag, using his heat vision, aimed for Mark's heart. Mark dodged, but the heat vision tore through his shoulder. He gritted his teeth, raised his arm, hardened his fist with his Earth Magi abilities, and with a roar, delivered a single punch towards Thrag's face. The effect was devastating. Thrag's skull exploded. Silence. The body dropped into the lava with a hiss. Mark floated there, bloodied, breathing hard, staring down at the molten pool. Then he grabbed Thrag's headless corpse by the leg and started flying home. He didn't need Thrag or Sinclair alive to study the serum. Thrag's decapitated body dangled from Mark's hand, blood dripping in slow, syrupy globs onto the polished alloy floors. He dropped it unceremoniously beside the hole in the wall Thrag made earlier. The thud echoed. The room's lighting flickered as his Invincibots, who had been engaged in a chaotic scuffle, continued their assault. Their opponent was still up. Bald, snarling, and twitching erratically, the alternate DA Sinclair lashed out at the surrounding bots with flailing arms. The sonic emitters they had equipped were working. Sinclair grunted and screamed every time a different frequency was fired, but he kept trying his best to destroy the robots, though. The Kryptonian physiology given to him by Compound HK was quickly helping him combat the pain. Mark hovered into the room, battered, his cloak slightly damaged and fluttering with each step. His gaze locked on Sinclair. Enough. Sinclair looked up, eyes bloodshot. "You did this to me. I'll perfect you too," he screamed, voice cracking under stress. "I'll reshape you into the ultimate being." In a blur, Mark was in front of him. He didn't waste words. The famous Viltrumite hand chop swung clean through Sinclair's neck. His eyes widened in frozen shock before his body crumpled to the floor, his severed head rolling to a stop at Mark's feet. No ceremony. No victory monologue. Just cold indifference. Mark stared at the corpse. He didn't feel guilt. This Sinclair wasn't someone who'd ever change. And more importantly, Mark had no time to babysit a maniac who could now potentially threaten an entire world. Mark turned to his Invincibots, blood still drying on his face. Recover the bodies. Every single piece is analyzed: DNA composition, neural structure, muscle growth, radiation absorption, magical resilience, and body decomposition rate. Everything. I want full data sheets on the effects of Compound HK and VK before I give them to anyone I care about. Also, clean up all the damage Sinclair and Thrag caused. The bots moved immediately, silent and precise. He watched for a moment, then took a breath. The adrenaline was starting to wear off. Pain crept back in, his fractured arm, the ragged hole in his shoulder, and the burns and bruises lining his ribs. Mark winced and walked to the medpod near the back of the lab. He glanced longingly at the distant red sky through the viewport. Sunbathing would have been nice. He would have just used one of the solar pods in his lab, but they were currently being repaired by his Invincibots after getting damaged in their fight with Sinclair. But he wasn't going back through a portal to Invincible Incorporated. Not like this. Not with Amber, Eve, his mom, and Anissa potentially stumbling upon his injured state. He didn't want to scare them. His father wouldn't be too worried and would probably just wonder who could give his son a beating like this. He looked down at himself. His once regal Emperor's outfit was now shredded and stained beyond repair. Damn it, he muttered. He'd really grown attached to this outfit. He liked his invincible costume but thought the Emperor fit was cooler. He'll just use his fluid fabric to simulate the outfit. Mark took off the damaged clothing and placed himself inside a medical pod. The pod hissed closed, a soft green glow illuminating the room as it filled with a viscous regenerative solution he'd customized himself. Pain faded slowly as the liquid began repairing his injuries. 2 hours passed in silence. When he emerged, fully healed, he felt like he'd been reborn. He was definitely stronger than he was before, and when he eventually receives yellow sunlight, he'll be even stronger. Reaching into a desk, Mark pulled out a wristband and put it on. Mark used the morphing feature of his fluid fabric, letting a red and white weave spread over his body. The new version copied his Emperor suit design exactly, even simulating the long white cloak around his shoulder. Whenever Mark looked at it, he had to remind himself, this is not a cape. It's a cloak. And cloaks are fine, while capes just suck. Plus, this acts like a blanket and Amber and Eve love it. He dried himself with a flick of fire magi energy, steam hissing off his body. As he walked to the command console, one of the Invincibots pinged him. The autopsies were complete. Mark reviewed the data. It was everything he'd hoped for. Compound HK had successfully transformed Sinclair into a full Kryptonian-adjacent human. His strength, bone density, and bioelectric aura mimicked that of a yellow sun-enhanced Kryptonian. And more importantly, there were no negative side effects whatsoever. Mark's developed resistance to the red sun and magic was present, but weaker than his own resistance. Though with more exposure, it seems Sinclair could also build more resistance towards these weaknesses as well. Meaning the serum worked flawlessly. Compound VK, administered to Thrag, was equally successful. Despite his Viltrumite smart atoms, the serum had adapted. His body accepted the Kryptonian DNA and even began producing the bioelectric field naturally. The serum had truly worked, even with an elite, old Viltrumite warrior like Thrag. Perfect, Mark mutters. Now it was time for the next step. He walked to the secure storage vault and removed 2 vials. One held a sample of Compound HK. The other was the preserved blood sample he'd taken from Jennifer Walters, Earth 616 She-Hulk. Carefully, Mark combined them into a custom hybrid serum. The green hue shimmered in the light, pulsating. Now, back at Invincible Incorporated, Amanda floated in her medical pod in the medical area. Her vitals were stable. Her body was already completely healthy, but her mind had yet to awaken. Mark tested that her coma would end when she was injected with the serum, but there will be some complications. Mark opened the pod, bringing Amanda's body to a cushioned bed in the room. She remained still, eyes gently shut. Her hair splayed across the pillow in a mess. "Here goes everything," he muttered. He injected the serum into her arm and waited for the serum to take effect. For a couple of minutes, nothing happened. Then, her fingers twitched. Her lips parted. Her eyes slowly opened, blue irises scanning the ceiling before shifting toward him. There was a flicker of confusion, then a soft, warm smile. "Mark." Mark's chest loosened with relief. "Hey, you're safe." She tried to sit up. Where are we? Last I remember, we were fighting Omnipotus and..." She stopped. Her breath hitched. An unfamiliar heat ignited in her chest. A pulse of energy that wasn't there before. Her heart rate spiked. Her muscles tensed. And then, rage. Unfiltered, irrational, overwhelming anger. Her hands clenched at her scalp, trying to contain the noise. Her body began to swell, with her muscles expanding and veins glowing green beneath her skin. Her eyes burned bright with fury. "Mark, what's happening to me?" She screamed. Her bathing suit stretched as her body grew taller, bulkier, and way taller than Mark. Her skin turned a deep, jade green. Her hair, while retaining the same structure she had, grew longer and wilder. Her chest was heaving, taking in lots of air. Amanda was hulking out. Mark stepped back. "Ah shit, well, I knew it would happen." He had anticipated this. The first transformation was going to be the worst. With She-Hulk's DNA, she'd eventually gain instant control after the initial transformation. But for now, Amanda, Monster Girl, or maybe she should be called She-Hulk, let out a roar that shook the walls. Roar. Mark flew up to her. Amanda. It's me. You're okay, just breathe. Her hand moved faster than he expected. Crack. A backhanded blow sent him flying through the reinforced glass of the room, out the side of Invincible Incorporated, and careening across the city skyline. He tumbled, recovered midair, and skidded across the sky like a stone across water. Hovering, rubbing his jaw, he exhaled. I don't know why I thought that would work. He couldn't bring himself to hit her full force, not like he did with Thrag. But he had to stop her from going on a rampage, so he'll have to suck it up and put hands on his friend with benefits. He realized she technically still wasn't his girlfriend. I gave her the DNA of a Kryptonian, but she hasn't absorbed sunlight yet. So, she won't have any Kryptonian abilities yet, which is good. He narrowed his eyes toward the tower, where Amanda's huge form burst through a wall and landed in the streets below, growling and confused, looking for something, anything, to smash. That's not good, he said with a sigh. I wanted to keep her contained in the tower, since I really don't want to be one of those heroes who constantly break buildings during big fights. It's so cliché. He clenched his fists and rocketed toward her, prepared to drag her out of the city. Amanda stood in the middle of the street, her towering green frame heaving with each breath. Her eyes were wild, glowing green faintly beneath a tangle of long, dark green hair. A guttural roar ripped from her throat, echoing off nearby buildings and setting off car alarms. People started screaming and scattered, fleeing in all directions. Cars swerved, with some crashing into light poles. Amanda's rage boiled over as her giant hands tore chunks of concrete from the ground. Her mind was a blur of fury. She didn't recognize where she was or even who she was. All she knew how to do was smash. And just as she grabbed a parked SUV, intending to hurl it into the nearest storefront, a voice cut through the haze. Hey! She spun, car still in her grasp, just in time to see Mark land directly in front of her. His cloak fluttered behind him, his posture cautious. She threw the car towards him. Mark reached out, catching the vehicle and putting it gently back on the ground with no effort. Amanda, Mark said, locking eyes with her. I know the rage is a lot, but I need you to fight through it. Once you ride this wave, you'll have no more issues with this again. Just try to calm down and not wreck the city. Amanda roared in response, a primal scream of defiance. She ran towards him, grappling hands and pushing against him, and for a moment, Mark felt the pressure. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was slowly growing. He frowned. She wasn't getting her Kryptonian abilities yet, as it would take a while, but her growing anger was increasing her strength. All right, fine, he muttered. Mark swiftly shifted his grip, catching her wrists. Then, with a burst of speed, he lifted off, flying her out of the city. She struggled wildly in his grasp, legs kicking, fists jerking in resistance. Amanda's knee slammed into his ribs. He didn't budge, but he felt that hit. The fact that he felt it meant she was already very strong and would only continue to grow stronger. He soared toward a beach just outside the city, a place with almost no foot traffic. As they reached the sand, Mark released her, and she slammed into the ground, carving out a wide crater with her impact. He zipped around the area, moving the handful of sunbathers and joggers out of harm's way. When he returned, Amanda was clawing her way out of the pit, glowing green eyes blazing with unchecked fury. Sand clung to her skin, and her hair hung like a curtain around her face. Mark hovered in front of her, watching her. She's still pretty hot, he thought. Even like this, she looks beautiful. Glad I ditched that male ogre form. Amanda lunged again, throwing a wild haymaker. Mark dodged, weaving around her strikes. But her strikes continued to grow faster and heavier. Amanda, I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner to help you fight Omnipotus, he said, hoping to reach Amanda's consciousness beneath the rage. You don't have to fight anymore, so you can calm down. Her roar was all the answer he got, more guttural and filled with anger. Mark winced. Okay, no more of the O word. He caught her next punch and flung her toward the ocean. She smashed into the waves with a massive splash, sinking deep. Mark dove in after her, hoping the cold water would slow her down. It didn't. She surged with even more anger and unleashed a thunderclap that created a sonic boom underwater. Mark was launched out of the ocean, tumbling through the air before catching himself mid-flight. Damn, he muttered. He darted right behind her as she breached the surface and caught her in a tight bear hug, restricting her arms. They landed hard, with Mark's back taking the brunt of the impact. "Listen to me," he whispered in her ear. "You're stronger than this. You've been through worse than this and managed to deal with it for such a long time. You can get through the rage." She writhed and snarled, but he didn't let go. He held her for over an hour, letting her rage burn out. He kept talking, repeating her name, telling her he was here, that she was safe, and that she was loved. Slowly, it worked. Amanda's breathing slowed, showing she was calming down. Her body shrank. The green skin faded back to pale. Her muscles receded, and her wild hair fell across her face, returning to brown. When it was over, she lay in Mark's arms, blinking up at him. "Mark," she asked, voice groggy and confused. "Why are we on a beach?" Mark was curious. "You don't remember?" She sat up, brushing hair from her eyes. "Kinda, it feels like a fog of different scenes, so I don't have the full picture. But I remember raging out and smashing stuff." Mark explained everything about how she was injured, how he'd removed her curse, how he'd healed her, how he used She-Hulk's DNA and his compound HK to give her powers, and how she now had control of her powers since her first transformation was over. However, he didn't tell her how he tested his compound serums against evil versions of people he's fought before. That reminds him he should stop by Evil Thrag's dimension and see if he can help that Mark come back, as well as acquire some Thraxan Viltrumite hybrids. But Amanda listened in quiet awe. "So, I'm still me," she said at last. "Just green and sexy?" "You were always hot," Mark teased. "But yeah, with some exceptions. The feeling of transformation should feel similar to how it was for you before. But you won't turn into a male monster but instead a larger, greener version of yourself. Also, when you absorb more sunlight, you'll gain powers like mine." She smirked slyly. "Did you change my monster form because it was a dude?" "No comment," he said, avoiding her eyes. She got her answer. Still lying on his chest, bringing her face closer to his, "It almost seems like you changed it because you didn't want to be seen dating a male monster, as you put it." Mark with sarcasm. "I don't recall us dating. If I remember correctly, I'm still waiting for your answer from when I left for Telescria." Amanda leaned in and kissed him deeply. "For everything you've done, how could I not be your girlfriend?" Mark grinned. "About time." They lay in the sand together, kissing each other. Amanda, with her stretched-out bikini, lay on Mark, moving her tongue in his mouth while he reciprocated. The two stayed there getting friskier, letting the fading sunlight warm their skin. Meanwhile, somewhere deep in the Alaskan wilderness a thick blanket of snow covered the dense pine forest. The quiet was broken only by the rhythmic crunch of heavy boots and the dragging of a bundle of chopped logs over one broad shoulder. Standing at 6 feet 10 inches, with 400 pounds of pure muscle, this shoulder belonged to the former ruler of the Viltrumites, Thrag. But now, he was undercover as a humble lumberjack who did jobs in a nearby small town. After Emperor Mark's decree to integrate and reproduce with Earth's population, Thrag landed near a secluded northern town and found an abandoned wooden cabin on the edge of the woods. The place was dusty and clearly abandoned. Though strangely, he'd found what appeared to be an old superhero costume with an eye insignia hanging in the closet, which he'd promptly tossed into a fire. Over a few days, he'd repaired the cabin with his own hands, cutting down trees, patching holes, and using the funds the Emperor gave to buy essentials. He was heading home when the ground trembled. A deep, guttural rumble echoed through the snow-draped forest. Thrag stopped mid-step, his instincts flaring. With a deafening crash, a massive, dark gray humanoid robot that was 50 feet tall and made from a strong metallic alloy burst through the tree-line. Before Thrag could fully react, the machine threw a punch, launching him through a grove of trees like a ragdoll. He caught himself mid-air, righting his body. He narrowed his eyes. Not because he was hurt, it'd take far more than that, but because something dared to attack him. "What is this contraption?" he muttered, his voice a mix of fury and disbelief. Enraged, he rocketed forward and slammed his fist into the robot's chest. It landed, but the moment he made contact brought an agonizing sound to his ears. Thrag staggered back, hands clasping his skull as blood leaked from his ears. The metal vibrated with a frequency designed to disrupt a Viltrumite's equilibrium. The robot, taking its opportunity, retaliated with a brutal backhand, sending him crashing into the snow and through a few trees. Grimacing, Thrag rose to one knee, the sound still playing as the robot's right arm morphed into a crab-like claw. A glowing yellow energy blast was forming in between the claw's pincers, aimed right for Thrag. The pain was debilitating for Thrag. He struggled to focus as his vision was getting blurry. But, in that moment, he'd had enough. He was brought to his knees once by Mark Grayson, and he won't kneel to a simple machine. Thrag snarled, "I will not be beaten once again." Thrag shot into the air, weaving between the energy blasts as the robot opened fire. Circling around, he bulldozed through the machine's leg, ripping it from the joint. But as the robot buckled, the sound intensified, like thousands of knives slicing through his skull. The robot staggered but didn't fall. In response, from its back, 3 segmented scorpion-like tails whipped out, humming with stored power, each firing bolts of concentrated energy. One beam scorched Thrag's side. Another clipped his shoulder. The third tore a flaming line across his chest. He gritted his teeth and shot upward into the sky, then turned and plummeted down like a meteor. Thrag screamed. "Aya!" Plus Ultra, a sonic boom cracked the air as he launched himself through the robot's chest, tearing through its internal components. Sparks and black smoke exploded around him as the robot collapsed in a heap, its core destroyed. Thrag floated over the ruined robot, steam rising from his shoulders. His ears still rang, but for the most part, he was fine. He looked around, expecting another attack. Nothing. But unknown to him, a small, mosquito-sized drone whirred near some of his fallen blood. It hovered for a second before dipping down and absorbing the small amounts that leaked from Thrag's ears. Then, just as quietly, it zipped away into the sky, heading towards its mysterious creator. After a while, Thrag just continued on towards his cabin, continuing his walk home. Thrag stepped towards the doorway of the wooden home he'd refurbished with his own hands. The front door creaked as it opened, though he wasn't the one who opened it. Thrag had reached for the door, but before his hand could touch the knob, it swung open from the inside. "You're home late, and what the hell happened to your clothes?" Standing in the doorway, arms crossed and brow furrowed, was a petite woman with sharp features and a sharp tongue to match. She was of Asian descent, her sleek black hair styled into a bob cut. She had a C-cup chest and an athletic build and had a purple and black hoodie peeking out from under a pink apron that read, "Shut up and eat." This woman was Catherine Kate Shaw, better known to the world as Duplicate. Thrag grunted, brushing past her as he stomped snow off his boots. Was just some branches. Clothes got scratched up. Kate blinked, eyes narrowing. "Branches, huh? So that explains the burn marks." She followed him inside, arms still folded. He didn't answer, trying to brush past the topic. She knew it was a lie but also knew better than to push when he was in one of his gruff moods. Thrag hadn't explained what he was, as he was undercover. Though Kate could tell he wasn't a normal human. She just figured he was an enhanced person who didn't want to be a hero or a villain and just acted as a civilian but had powers. "I made dinner," she said, watching as he headed toward the back hall. "You should wash up first." He continued moving, but she reached out, grabbing his arm and turning him around before pressing a single finger to his chest. "Ah, where's my kiss?" Thrag paused. With a reluctant grunt, he leaned in and kissed her. It was meant to be quick, but Kate pulled him in closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. The kiss deepened. Thrag's massive hands found her waist, holding her gently. Their bodies pressed together, warmth blooming between them. When they finally pulled apart, Kate smiled up at him. "Now you can go clean up." He turned again without protest. But as he walked away, a faint red touched the tips of his ears. "Okay," he said quietly. Kate smirked and turned back to the kitchen. Flashback, how it all began. When Thrag was first sent down to Earth as part of Mark's integration initiative, he needed a cover. Using the funds Mark granted him, he began restoring the abandoned cabin deep in the wilderness he'd found. He also found a job as a lumberjack. One day, while buying hardware in town, he bumped into her, literally. Kate, or rather one of her clones, had been shopping for groceries. The clone collided with him and bounced off like she'd hit a brick wall. "Watch where you're going," she grumbled, rubbing her forehead. The reason she was out here was because this town was actually the place her original body was located. She kept herself hidden here, as it was safe, and so if one day all of her other clones were to die, she'd survive. Thrag was about to kick her away. His first instinct was to dismiss and belittle, as he'd done this for many millennia to inferior races. But he remembered Mark's orders: do not harm humans. With barely masked disgust, he sucked his teeth, reached down, took her by the wrist, and helped her up. He then turned and walked off. Kate had watched him go, her eyes lingering. Weirdo, but damn, she mumbled, noticing how ridiculously built he was. Their paths crossed again. First in silence, then with brief nods. Eventually, she approached him at the general store. Hi. Thrag was going to walk away. But he didn't. Hi, he said stoically. She then asked him questions, like where he was from and what brought him to town. He snapped back at her eventually, frustrated by her curiosity. Why do you keep pestering me? She recoiled, then fired back. Because you're new around here, and I was just interested. But forget it. She stormed off toward the edge of town, leaving Thrag standing alone. He just stood there dumbly before going back to his shopping, though slightly confused. That same evening, taking a different trail home, Thrag found Kate curled on the ground by herself, clutching her head and trembling. Her face was streaked with tears. He said nothing at first. Just stood over her. Kate barely noticed him. Her pain, emotional and psychic, was overwhelming. Another clone had just died on a mission with the Guardians. Even though they could think independently, they felt collectively. And ever since Omnipotus, when so many of her died, the loss of a clone hit harder. You okay? Thrag asked, his voice devoid of concern but not quite hostile. Kate looked up, confused and angry. What does it matter to you? You don't know what it's like to die over and over again. To feel every death, whether it's to be stabbed, burned, or mauled. To feel older than others, as if living multiple lifetimes from your perspective, but each life being cut short due to death. To be raised and bred to fight, just to be used and discarded. Thrag stiffened. Those last words hit too close to home. She turned away, still sobbing. Thrag kneeled toward her. He then wiped her tears with his thumb. Kate looked up, startled. His touch was careful, gentle in a way she hadn't expected. He stood again, picked up his supplies, and walked away. But before disappearing into the trees, he paused. I know what it's like, to be bred for battle and to be thrown away. Then he left. This was the start. From then on, Kate tried getting closer, leading to the two being around each other more. Though they have only limited themselves to kissing so far, and Kate comes over for dinner sometimes. Amanda rested on top of Mark, her head nestled against his chest, both of them completely nude, lying on Mark's cloak. Mark trailed his fingers down the curve of Amanda's back, still basking in the afterglow, a cocky grin playing at his lips. That was incredible, he said quietly. Amanda chuckled, her cheek still pressed against his skin. Back when we used to smash, you were holding back a lot before, weren't you? I didn't want to hurt you, Mark said with mock innocence, kissing her forehead. Though it always felt good, the new monster form just added to the experience a little more. Amanda smirked. I feel like I've got stamina for days. Even in my regular form. Mark raised a brow. Oh? Should I take that as a challenge and keep going? She rolled her eyes playfully. Don't get a big head, Emperor. You've got 3 women to handle instead of just one. So while I may not be able to handle you alone, all 3 of us will have you asleep when we are done with you. Mark's grin faltered. Actually, it's 4 now. Amanda blinked. Slowly, she lifted her head to look him in the eye, suspicion growing on her face. You're joking. I mean, no, Mark said, a nervous sweat forming at his temple. But I didn't get with her. I waited for your answer first, so technically, you're still 3rd. Amanda stared at him, blank-faced. So you couldn't even wait until I officially became your girlfriend to have someone else lined up? Mark gave her his best sheepish smile. It wasn't like that. She sighed, shaking her head. But before she could tease him more, a distant sound caught both of their ears, voices, approaching from the boardwalk. We should probably head out, Mark said. Amanda whispered, "Give me your clothes. Mine are shredded." With a thought, Mark's wristband morphed back into his full Viltrumite Emperor suit. The regal and pristine red and white colors, along with the crest of the Empire emblazoned on his chest. Yeah, Mr. High-Tech suit. Just give me something to wear. Mark chuckled, extending part of his suit's living fabric to form around her. It wove itself into a sleek, form-fitting outfit, matching in color and design to his but styled differently, a white high skirt instead of pants. Though she still had the long-sleeved red shirt with the white Viltrumite insignia. Amanda looked over the outfit, brushing her fingers across the hem. "Let me guess. I'm officially one of your concubines now," she said in a sarcastic tone. "More like one of my empresses," Mark said, swatting her gently on the rear, earning a blush. "No concubines. All of you are queens to me." Amanda smiled, leaning in to kiss him. "Damn right we are." Mark wrapped his arms around her waist and lifted off, soaring through the night sky with Amanda nestled in his arms. The city lights shimmered beneath them, growing distant as they approached the towering skyscraper of Invincible Incorporated. They landed softly on the penthouse balcony, Mark letting Amanda down gently. She adjusted her new outfit, still marveling at the way it clung perfectly to her body. When Mark slid open the glass door, the scene inside was casual. Amber, Eve, and Anissa were all curled up on the couch, with Amber and Eve trying to explain to Anissa that reality TV isn't actual reality and is instead scripted. "I don't understand, is it not categorized as reality TV?" questioned Anissa. "Yes, but it's still scripted, just a TV show based on what we can perceive to be real people and the real world in the show," Eve was saying. Amber agreed. "Yeah, it's what people think reality is like in certain cases, but the actual events in the show are thought up by writers." All three turned as the door opened. Mark stepped through, and Amanda poked her head out from behind his cloak with a bright smile. They all went still. Their eyes immediately dropped to Amanda's outfit, identical in design to Mark's. Eve raised an eyebrow. Amber's eyes widened. Anissa's fingers twitched instinctively, as if she were fighting the urge to kneel. Viltrumite culture ran deep in her blood. Amanda's attire was unmistakably the garb of a ruler on Viltrum. "So she said yes," Eve said with a small smile. Amanda nodded, a little nervously. "Yeah, I did." Amber stepped forward, eyes softening. "Then welcome." Eve followed suit with a gentle nod. Even Anissa, after a brief pause, approached and extended her hand, her demeanor unusually respectful. Amanda hesitated before taking it, and Anissa gave her a firm shake. Then, in a blur, Anissa moved at super speed, knocking Mark flat on his back with a thud. "What the?" Before he could react, she straddled his waist and planted a deep kiss on his lips, her tongue slipping past his defenses. Mark's eyes went wide. Amber and Eve blinked, stunned. When Anissa pulled away, her gaze was smoldering. "Now that Amanda has joined, it's my turn to ravish you tonight." Mark blinked. "Wait, I haven't even," but before he could finish, Anissa was yanked upward by a glowing pink construct, a rope of energy looped around her waist. "Hold up," Eve said, rising to her feet. "Before anyone gets ravished, we need to talk." She turned to Amanda, who tensed slightly. "How come you get the matching outfit?" Eve asked. Amanda looked to Mark, unsure. I just made it on the spot." Mark stammered. "We were both naked. I thought it looked cool and, look, it's not favoritism." Amber squinted at him. "You sure?" "I swear," Mark said, raising his hands. "I can make outfits for everyone. No favorites." Eve smirked and, with a flick of her fingers, created duplicates of Amanda's outfit tailored for herself, Amber, and Anissa, each style to their own tastes. The room glowed with white and red fabric, the sigils of Viltrum flashing like royalty on parade. Mark looked around, then grinned. "Okay, you all look amazing. It's kind of like I'm marking that you guys are all mine." Amber rolled her eyes. "Ego much?" Eve and Amanda giggled. Even Anissa cracked a smirk. Amber gave him a kiss on the cheek. But still sweet. Suddenly, Anissa hoisted Mark over her shoulder like a sack of potatoes. "I've waited patiently for 2 months," she said, completely serious. "Now it's my night." Amber and Eve exchanged looks. Eve sighed. Fair enough. Amanda smiled. I've had my time. Go for it. Anissa didn't wait for more approval. She vanished into the penthouse hallway, Mark in tow, grumbling something about how he didn't even get to ask her out yet. He had no problem being carried like this by one of his women, though if anyone were around, he'd be the one doing the carrying. The others settled onto the couch, getting to know each other better, as while Eve and Amanda slightly knew each other, they'd basically be sisters now, so they should get to know each other deeper. Morning sunlight filtered softly through the tall windows of the Invincible Incorporated penthouse, casting golden light across the marble floors and sleek furniture. Mark slowly opened his eyes, blinking away the haze of sleep. The first thing he registered was warmth. Anissa was lying beside him, her toned body pressed close, and her big chest rested on him. She was still asleep, the blankets half draped over her figure, her breathing deep and steady. Mark turned his head slightly to look at her. She looked peaceful. Her usual assertive intensity was completely absent, replaced by satisfaction. He kissed her cheek gently before carefully slipping out of bed, though not before a quick squeeze of her boobs, which made her squirm. A hot shower helped shake off the fog of sleep, and soon he was toweling off and stepping into the hallway, his bare feet quiet on the cool floor. When he reached the living room, he paused and smiled. Amber, Eve, and Amanda were all asleep together on the couch, curled against one another under a shared blanket. Eve's head was resting on Amanda's shoulder, while Amber had one arm flopped over Eve's waist. The sight made his heart swell. He moved at super speed, gently relocating each of them to one of the many empty bedrooms on his private floor. As he did so, he realized it was time to give them each their own dedicated rooms on his floor. They'd been spending more time here lately, and it only made sense. Eve had her own floor, but he might as well move her to his floor and have them all live with him. Maybe I should just build a megabed for my room, he muttered to himself, chuckling as he stretched. He got to work in the kitchen, moving like clockwork. Omelets first, folded carefully with cheese and chopped vegetables. Then waffles, stacked high and golden. Bacon sizzled in a pan to the side. He made plenty, knowing how everyone would wake up hungry, especially Amanda, now that she had a new form and probably a faster metabolism as a result. Just as he was flipping another pancake, his communicator buzzed. Tapping the device embedded in his wristband, a blue holographic screen appeared. A Viltrumite soldier saluted from the bridge of the mothership parked on the moon. Emperor Mark, the soldier said, standing at attention. We've received a report that former Grand Regent Thrag was attacked. The source was an unknown mechanical construct. He survived, but the encounter has raised some concerns. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. He nodded. Tell Thrag to meet me at the mothership. I'll be there shortly. Yes, sire. The soldier saluted, then the transmission cut out. Mark set the spatula down and glanced toward the hallway where his partners were still sleeping. He didn't want to leave before they were all up, but this needed his attention. 'Tis the duty of the one who bears the crown, and Mark had to shoulder that burden as the Viltrumites were his people. He activated his suit. The material morphed seamlessly over his body, switching from casual wear into his red and white Emperor uniform, the Viltrumite insignia proudly displayed on his chest, and the white fur cloak flowing freely over his shoulders. He stepped out onto the balcony, letting the morning air hit his face before rising into the sky, accelerating toward the moon. The Viltrumite ship came into view quickly, parked on the moon's surface, cloaked in a shimmering layer of shielding. He flew into the hangar bay, activating the airlock, and was quickly greeted by a Viltrumite soldier who saluted and directed him to a meeting room. As he walked down the corridor, the soldier gave him a data tablet. We compiled what we could from our surveillance units. Here's the footage from the encounter, the soldier said. But there's something else, sir. Mark raised an eyebrow. The audio from the video, it's dangerous. The sound it emitted injured multiple Viltrumites who tried to analyze it. All of them felt disorientation and immense crippling pain. Mark took the tablet and looked over the footage silently. As he watched Thrag being knocked off his feet, clearly in pain from the sonic weapon, Mark's mind narrowed in on two potential culprits. He didn't confirm anything yet. Instead, he handed the tablet back and spoke calmly. Send the full video, audio included, to the meeting room. I'll analyze it there. The soldier hesitated, clearly worried. Sire, I would advise against playing the audio in an enclosed space. Mark looked him in the eye. I'll be fine. Just make sure the room is sealed off. The soldier gave a crisp nod and walked away. Mark entered the meeting room a moment later and sat down as the projector activated, casting a three-dimensional hologram of the battle into the center of the room. The visuals were clear. Thrag was in civilian clothes being blindsided in a snowy forest by a massive humanoid machine armed with advanced weaponry. The sonic attack visibly staggered Thrag, forcing him to his knees and making him bleed from the ears. Mark watched the entire clip in silence. Then he played it again, this time using his enhanced vision and hearing to notice things not easily noticed. He tuned his ears specifically to the audio spectrum, dissecting it layer by layer. He blocked the harmful frequencies instinctively, letting his Kryptonian biology handle what his Viltrumite side could not. That was when he saw it. A nearly invisible insect-sized machine was buzzing around the wreckage, drawn to a patch of blood in the snow. It hovered, scanned, and then landed briefly and absorbed some before flying away. Mark paused the video and leaned back in his chair. It was him. He didn't want it to be, but all the signs pointed to one person. Mark had thought that maybe he'd make the right choices this time, that events would play out differently. But some people seemed to follow the path they were destined for. The door opened in front of him, and Thrag stepped inside. No longer dressed in civilian garb, but clad once more in the pristine, all-white battle uniform of the Viltrumite elite. Greetings, sire. You asked to see me. Mark stood with his arms behind his back, projecting calm authority. Yeah. I wanted to go over what happened during your encounter with that robot yesterday. Thrag raised an eyebrow slightly but kept his posture steady. It wasn't much of a threat. The sound-based attack was inconvenient, but otherwise it posed no real danger. Mark narrowed his eyes but didn't challenge the exaggeration. I've seen the footage. You held your own. Good. That said, I want you to come with me. We're going to track down whoever sent that machine after you. Thrag blinked. For a moment, he looked genuinely confused. You want me to accompany you for vengeance? Internally, Thrag felt something unexpected, a slight pang of surprise. Part of him thought Mark would have brushed this off, maybe even used it as an excuse to parade him around as weak to his former subordinates. But no, Mark was treating Thrag differently than a normal Viltrumite emperor would. A normal Viltrumite emperor wouldn't care about the well-being of their subordinates so long as they survived. Mark nodded once. Yeah. I can't be having my citizens being attacked without consequences. Without another word, Thrag straightened up and nodded. Understood. Two other Viltrumite soldiers were standing nearby them, already suited for departure, flanking Mark as he led them out of the meeting chamber and into open space. In a flash of red and white, the Emperor shot forward toward Earth, the others following just behind. During the flight, Mark didn't say much. His mind was thinking through his suspicions. The sophistication of the robot's design. The sound frequency Viltrumites were weak to, the blood collecting. It all pointed to one person, but he still didn't understand why. Already waiting outside the GDA, after receiving reports of 4 incoming signatures, were Cecil Stedman and Donald Ferguson. So what's with the impromptu visit? Cecil asked flatly, though Mark could detect the tightness in his voice. Mark didn't answer right away. Instead, he pulled a small metallic disc from his belt and activated it, projecting a holographic recording of the battle Thrag had faced. The footage played out in full, including the moment when the sonic weapon triggered and blood began dripping from Thrag's ears. Cecil's expression didn't change much, but Mark's supervision caught the slight dilation of his pupils, and he heard the subtle rise in his heart rate. I'm not here to accuse you, Mark said coolly, but I need to know, was this you? Or someone working under your command? Cecil looked offended, as expected. Excuse me? You think I sent a 50-foot robot to attack one of your people? Especially when we just allied. Mark's expression didn't waver. No. I think you're smarter than that. Which is why I'm asking. He tapped the disc again, and this time the projection changed to an underground facility buried beneath a southwestern desert. A massive cage surrounded the reanimated corpse of the Depth Dweller, alive but clearly sedated. Your monster is still in containment, Mark said quietly. So I knew it wasn't you that attacked Thrag. But someone who worked with you had access to its audio signature. Cecil looked between the hologram and Mark. His mouth opened for a rebuttal, then closed again. He was concerned with how Mark acquired surveillance on their activities and how much he knew, but it seemed as though Mark didn't care about them building weapons against his people. He sighed. Yeah, all right. You've made your point. We weaponized that thing before we knew Viltrumites weren't an extinction-level threat anymore. But we didn't use it at all. We didn't authorize any attacks. Mark nodded dismissively. I believe you. Cecil looked mildly surprised. You do. You forget I can hear lies. You're telling the truth. Which means someone else had the audio. Someone who could build something this complex and had worked on the project with you. Mark paused. Is Robot here? Cecil's eyes narrowed. You think Robot did this? Why would he do such a thing? He probably still wanted a new body, but why Thrags? Didn't he want Rex's? I thought deterring him the first time made him give up after he hadn't made an attempt in a while. Mark thinks. Just suspicion. Mark says. There was a brief silence. Robot's not here, Cecil finally said. He's at the Guardians HQ. Mark turned to the others. We're going. Before lifting off, he looked over his shoulder. You and I agreed on how to handle attacks like this. If a human targets one of my people, it's the Empire's jurisdiction. Cecil nodded grimly. Understood. As Mark and the others rose into the sky, Cecil pulled out his comm and barked to Donald, move the Depth Dweller to another location. And get Sinclair to prep a few Reanimen. Just in case this turns into something bigger than it already is. The 4 Viltrumites flew in silence until they reached a warehouse near the docks. It looked abandoned, with rust spreading across the metal siding and dusty windows that hadn't been cleaned in years. But Mark didn't hesitate. He shot down through the roof like a missile, sending a shower of metal and dust across the floor. The others landed beside him a moment later, their shoes crunching on broken debris. Inside, the air was cold and thick with the scent of machine oil. Half-assembled robots cluttered the room. At its center was a cylindrical tank filled with clear fluid, and suspended inside was the real body of robot Rudy Connors. The other Viltrumites weren't expecting this and looked disgusted. Rudy's real body floated in the tank. He was small, malformed, and fragile. His limbs were thin and uneven, and his skull bulged disproportionately. He had mechanical arms and legs extended from the tank, working busily at a nearby terminal. He noticed the intrusion and tried to continue working on his project in vain, but the moment his eyes locked on Mark, everything stopped. Panic and rage spread across his face. Thrag's eyes moved past Rudy, widening as he caught sight of a second tank off to the side. Smaller, but inside floated a nearly fully grown version of himself. His voice was sharp and filled with rage. What is this? Why is there another me? Mark stepped forward, his tone calm but direct. It was the reason he stole your blood. He cloned you. Most likely, to use your body as his own. But what I want to know is, why clone Thrag? Rudy stiffened as Mark started walking towards him, stunned that his sanctuary and plan had been discovered. He had expected to be safe here. He thought they would believe he died with his destroyed drone, and he could continue on with his plan. Now exposed, the truth settled in like a vice tightening around his chest. You want to know why? Rudy said, his voice bitter. Because of you. Mark arched a brow. Amanda and I were the same, Rudy continued, a manic tremble in his voice. Both trapped in bodies that didn't reflect our true selves. I wanted to be the one to help her, to fix her, to get her love. But you helped her before I could, and she chose you. Mark's face reflected disappointment. He recalled Amanda mentioning how she was never especially close to Robot when he asked her. Unlike Cannon, Amanda was closer to the women on the team than Robot, especially when she regained her adult body. Mark thought Robot would relax without Rex's body and give up on Amanda, but it seems he went crazy instead. For someone so smart, Mark said, you don't get people. But, I guess you never had the opportunity to interact with people. Rudy kept talking, as if he didn't hear him. She loved your strength. I tried getting your blood, but I couldn't, so I got something close. Another Viltrumite. I was going to make myself into someone better than you. Stronger. Smarter. And then, she'd see me. Silence fell. Then one of Cecil's portals opened behind them. Amanda stepped through. "I would never leave Mark," she said softly. Rudy's eye widened, and he curled up on himself. "Amanda, no. Don't look at me like this. This isn't how I wanted you to see me." She approached slowly, stopping beside Mark. Her eyes didn't leave the tank. "I'm sorry, Rudy," she said. "Even if you built a perfect body, it wouldn't change how I feel. I love Mark. Not because he's strong, but because of who he is." She glanced at Mark, her voice softening. "He helped me without ulterior motives. He never treated me like a child or a monster. He talked to me like I was normal when I wasn't." Mark offered her a small smile, but she didn't notice. Her gaze was locked on Rudy. "I get that you're hurt," she said, "but this isn't love. It's an obsession with the idea of me being like you." Rudy's expression twisted, his psyche cracking. "No," he hissed. "No one else can have you." From the shadows above, a dozen robots dropped down. A high-pitched frequency filled the warehouse. The Viltrumite guards and Thrag all groaned and fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Mark didn't move. He was practically immune to the Viltrumite weakness. Amanda's body shifted. Her muscles swelled, and her skin turned green. She roared, lunging forward and smashing the nearest robot into a wall. Metal crumpled like paper in her hands as she moved through them like a wrecking ball. Mark turned his attention to the clone tank. With a controlled beam of heat vision, he sliced through the structure, spilling its contents. He then increased the heat immensely, bypassing its Viltrumite durability and reducing the clone to vapor. Rudy screamed and activated weaponry from his tank. Mechanical limbs unfolded into blasters, aiming directly at Mark. "No. You won't take her from me." Before they could fire, Mark turned and shot a precise beam of heat vision straight through Rudy's chest. The tank cracked and hissed. Blood and fluid mixed, swirling into a fog. The noise ended. The robots fell with no one controlling them. Amanda stumbled, her transformation fading in her surprise at Mark's action. "Mark." He said nothing. He stepped forward and tore open the tank's glass. Rudy's deformed body sagged into his arms. His breathing was weak. "I just wanted to be normal," Rudy choked, blood spilling from his mouth. Mark looked down. "I know." He gently closed Rudy's eyes as the body went still. Amanda moved closer, shrinking back to her human form. Her hands trembled. Her eyes lingered on the ruined body in Mark's arms. She didn't speak, but her expression said enough. Disgust. Horror. Confusion. She looked around. Thrag and the guards were still recovering, ears bleeding, groaning in pain. She knew what Rudy did was wrong, but her heart still twisted. If they hadn't found him when they did, things could have gotten far worse. Maybe even irreversible. But seeing Rudy like that, killed so decisively, left a bitter taste in her mouth. She took a shaky step forward and touched Mark's arm. "Why? Why did you kill him? You could have just sent him to prison." Mark turned to her, seeing her horrified expression. He instead responded with a question. "Do you know the kind of hero I want to be?" Amanda frowned. "What does that?" "The kind with no regrets." Mark interrupted. He took her hands gently. "Earth is where I grew up, so I'll protect it with everything I have as a superhero, but I'm not going to be the kind of hero who gives up everything else just to wear the title." He paused. Thoughts drifted to another time, another name. Martian. A sick kid who never got to run or laugh or live. That boy died in a hospital bed. But now he had this superhero life with powers he couldn't believe he'd ever experienced before. But he was not going to become like the ones who gave up everything in pursuit of being a hero. Not Spider-Man. Not Batman. Not Canon Invincible before he realized, being a hero is bullshit. "I also don't want to be one of those heroes who regret not putting down a villain that can threaten my family, and it ends up coming back to bite him in the future," he said. "I'll show mercy to criminals, but not to someone who's this far gone. Someone who tried to harm my family and is already hurting my people. I can't afford to regret it if he causes more problems in the future." Amanda stood there, absorbing his words. She understood his logic, especially when she looked around and saw the other Viltrumites injured from the high-frequency sound. But it didn't sit right. She slowly pulled her hands away. I need time alone. Mark gave a quiet nod. I understand. She walked into the wreckage, leaving him behind. As soon as she disappeared from sight, Mark's gaze hardened. He turned toward a recently arrived Cecil. The older man adjusted his tie nervously as a red glow showed in Mark's eyes. I thought Amanda might make you go easy on Robot's punishment, Cecil sheepishly said, trying to sound calm. But I realize I shouldn't have interfered. I'm sorry. Mark didn't reply. He turned away, annoyed, and walked toward Rudy's main console. His hand met the keyboard, and he started using his technopathy. Data poured into his mind. Rudy's scientific ideas and designs, his cloning technology, and even his robot drone schematics were all laid bare before Mark. When it was done, Mark's eyes lit red again. He torched the lab, destroyed all the equipment, and vaporized Rudy's lifeless body. Cecil, seeing this, quietly teleported away, deciding to cut his losses. Mark turned to the recovering Viltrumites. Head back to the ship, he said. He looked at Thrag. You and I will talk later in my office. Thrag nodded and flew off with the guards. Mark lingered in the air above the ruins, staring at what was left. He let out a sigh. I didn't want Amanda, or the others, to see this ruthless side of me. Not yet, at least. Though Anissa probably wouldn't care, seeing as she wasn't raised on Earth and has no moral qualms against killing. But now Amanda will probably tell Eve and Amber. It doesn't really matter, though. I'm not one of those heroes with a no-kill rule. If you're a threat to me, my family, or my people, you don't get to walk away. The dimension of solitude was repaired. Mark floated above the floor, letting himself take in the sight. The building was upright, the lights were steady and fixed, and the broken walls had been repaired until no crack remained. His Invincibots had done their job thoroughly and returned back to construction ideas he's had for the whole planet. If a stranger stepped into his lab, they would never know this place had been damaged in his battle with Thrag. Mark ran his hand along a console in his lab, feeling the cool, smooth texture. Stupid Cecil, he muttered, his voice echoing faintly. The irritation hadn't faded yet. Cecil had dragged Amanda into Rudy's lab, putting her in the middle of something she never should have even known about. It was typical Cecil, always calculating, always trying to take control of the situation. Mark clenched his jaw, then exhaled. Well, it doesn't matter now, he said aloud, though it still bugged him. Sitting at his workbench, Mark tried to focus on anything else. He wasn't ready to go home yet, not with his thoughts this unsettled, and he didn't want to have to deal with a headache at home yet. His mind wandered instead to the things he needed to take care of. First was the Viltrumite Bodyguard Company. He needed to put that in motion soon to give the Viltrumites jobs and help them use their powers to better integrate with Earth. Then there was the meeting with Thrag about his relationship with Duplicate. I normally wouldn't do anything about this. But I never expected Thrag to end up with a one superhero whose children could end up with the same powers as her to clone endlessly due to a curse. I don't think I'll have to worry, but I don't want to take the risk of an uprising against Thrag and thousands of Viltrumite clones. Then there were his serums, compounds HK and VK, his greatest work so far. He'd need to offer them to his friends and family if they wanted to live as long as he did. And then he remembered. Oh. Right, he muttered, smacking a fist lightly into his palm. The alternate Thrag's offspring, the Thraxan Viltrumite hybrids. He'd had the idea to recruit some of them to this dimension. Mark rubbed his chin, weighing the idea. He could leave it for later, wait until things with the Viltrumites on Earth had settled, but he wasn't really doing anything right now, so why wait? Decision made, Mark summoned Levi's power. A green light crackled in his palm, widening into a shimmering portal that hummed with unstable energy. Without hesitation, he stepped through. The sky on the other side was brown and orange, heavy with dust. The sun burned like a furnace overhead, turning the horizon into a haze. Rocky terrain stretched out in all directions, with patches of bluegrass breaking up the wasteland. Mark was surrounded by purple mountains, their edges curvy and smooth instead of sharp and jagged like regular mountains. Mark landed on a ledge and looked around. Something scurried nearby. He turned to see a long, green creature shaped like a ferret, its back covered in scales. A horn sprouted from its skull, and rows of sharp teeth jutted from its mouth as it gnawed on a rock. "Cool," Mark murmured. He had never seen anything like it. The ground shook beneath him. At first, it was a light tremor, then a stronger one. Mark frowned and rose into the air, using his supervision to look across the entire planet. From above, the truth unfolded. The planet was scarred from battles taking place. Craters marked the valleys, smoke filled the skies from explosions, and black columns of ash rose into the atmosphere. Mark froze. Thrag's children and the Thraxans he had ruled were under attack. Their giant main ship was surrounded on all sides on both the ground and in the sky. There were dozens of coalition ships and fighter jets coming down from space, with some landing and dropping coalition soldiers, as well as a large Viltrumite ship, with the last known groups of pure-blooded Viltrumites emerging. Coalition soldiers moved across the ground in disciplined lines, their rifles spitting plasma into crowds of civilians. Above them, Viltrumites loyal to Nolan cut through the skies, overwhelming any resistance. The older hybrids were taking on the main threat of the pure-blooded Viltrumites, but they were being thrown aside with ease. Below, defenseless Thraxan women and children were gunned down or dragged into custody. Mark's stomach sank. He felt a rush of shock and then slight guilt. "I didn't think this would happen just because I captured Thrag. It hadn't even been that long since I took him," he scowled bitterly. "I left his children and the Thraxans exposed at the wrong time. And this is the result." His mind flickered back to the Flaxans, to their destroyed armies, their burning cities, and the lives he had ended without hesitation. Though the Flaxans were evil and would have continued to invade Earth, the Thraxan Viltrumites were just misguided. Mark drew in a slow breath of disappointment, as he didn't expect to get involved in another coalition war. "I'm gonna have to do more work than I expected here." Ursal POV. I floated in the sky surrounded by the chaos of battle, my fists clenched and my body trembling as I struggled to stay composed. The sky above me was filled with coalition ships, their engines rumbling like distant thunder. Fighters streaked overhead in sharp lines of fire, while soldiers poured into the streets below, cutting down any Thraxan who dared resist. It had been days since my father disappeared. At first, I convinced myself it was a test, that he had withdrawn on purpose to judge us from afar. Or he'd stayed in his chambers, being solitary as usual when he was not busy mating with Thraxan females. But his chambers were empty. We searched the entire ship. We searched the planet. There was no sign of him anywhere. The others turned to me because I was the eldest of Thrag's children, the strongest, the one who had emerged first. Although my twin brother Onan was the same age as me, he was more reckless and weaker than me. And I was born 3 minutes earlier than him. I accepted the role without complaint, issuing orders, sending my siblings to attack coalition planets before retreating back, pretending as though nothing had changed. But it was different now. There had been 1,500 of us, born from Thraxan mothers and Thrag's Viltrumite blood. Out of that number, only 1,000 possessed power, and just 300 were strong enough to take down a single, normal pure-blooded Viltrumite in a group. But, considering the remaining purebloods were the cream of the crop for Viltrumite standards, even groups of 12 hybrids would have a hard time taking a single one of them down. It was not enough. The coalition had come in overwhelming numbers. Thousands of soldiers. Dozens of warships. And with them, 50 pureblood Viltrumites. They struck like lightning, faster and stronger than most of my siblings could react to. I saw my twin, Onan, smashed into the ground by a single punch from one of the purebloods, his blood spraying across the dirt. I saw 2 of my younger sisters gunned down by coalition soldiers as they tried to protect a cluster of Thraxans. The cries and screams all around me tore at my resolve, each one cutting deeper than the last. And then I saw them. The 2 monsters. Emperor Nolan and the Great Alan. The 2 fought side by side, pushing through groups of hybrids as though we were little more than obstacles in their path. Nolan's face was calm, almost detached, his fists breaking bodies with mechanical precision. Alan moved with deliberate power, his blows intended to kill without hesitation. My throat tightened. Father had always spoken of Nolan as a traitor, a weak coward who had turned his back on what it meant to be a Viltrumite. But standing there, watching him now, I realized he was something else entirely. He was not weak. He was merciless. I forced my face to remain its usual blank features and my voice steady as I shouted orders to those who could still fight, but inside, my composure was unraveling. I wanted to scream and cry. I wanted to demand my father appear, to do anything other than watch my family cut down around me. How did they even find us? Ursal muttered lowly under her breath. Unbeknownst to Ursal, this all started when one of her brothers, whom she'd sent on a mission, hadn't come back when he was expected to. Flashback: the cell was cold, and the air carried a metallic bite that scraped against my throat every time I breathed. I knelt on the stone floor, heavy cuffs locking my wrists and ankles together. They weren't normal restraints. I could feel the way they hummed faintly against my skin, pulling at my strength, making every movement harder than it should have been. My father always told us to never kneel, never submit, yet here I was, bound and forced into the position of a prisoner. I'd been attacking a coalition planet my sister sent me to as per usual, but I was caught off guard when a pure-blooded Viltrumite was revealed to be stationed there. It seems as though they were lying in wait, as if they knew one of us would come to attack this planet. I thought with my strength I could put up a fight, but I was mistaken. The pureblood barely seemed to take me seriously and defeated me so easily that it was like he was fighting a child. I was severely injured and placed in this cell. The door hissed open. I lifted my head, my eyes narrowing at the sight of the two figures who walked in. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his red and white uniform immediately marking him as Viltrumite royalty. The other was an orange being with a single eye. The new Viltrumite Emperor, Nolan, and the leader of the coalition, Alan. A surge of hatred rose in my chest, hotter than the weight of the cuffs. Well, if it isn't the betrayer, I spat, my voice raw but steady. My father warned us about you. He told us how you stole what was his, how you twisted our people with weakness. Nolan didn't snap back. He didn't even look offended. Instead, he lowered himself to one knee so that his eyes were level with mine. The way he looked at me wasn't like an enemy staring down a foe. It was worse. It was a pity. You've been misled, young one, he said, his tone wise. Your father wanted power above all else. He filled your head with lies because he couldn't accept that the Viltrumites could be something more. But you don't have to repeat his mistakes. You don't have to follow him into ruin. He placed a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and firm but not cruel. You could have a place in the new empire we're building. You could live, not just survive. All you have to do is tell me where your father is. Let me speak to him. For a moment, I hesitated. His words made me think of the time before his disappearance and the coldness father had towards all his children. There was a part of me that wondered if father had decided to abandon us, but the thought burned. I shrugged it away with anger. No. I leaned forward and slammed my forehead into Nolan's face with all the force I could gather. I expected to feel bone and cartilage break, to see him recoil in pain. Instead, it was me who cried out, white-hot agony exploding through my skull as if my forehead had split straight down the middle. Blood ran down my face, dripping onto the cuffs. Nolan didn't even flinch. When my father returns, I hissed, my voice shaking with both pain and fury, he'll make you pay for this. He'll tear you apart. Nolan only sighed as if the answer disappointed him, though he noted that Thrag had apparently gone somewhere, then stood and turned away. Then you've made your choice. He and Alan walked out without another word, leaving me kneeling in the dim blue light of the cell. For a long time, I let the pain consume me. My head throbbed with every heartbeat, blood crusted over my brow, and the weight of the cuffs seemed to drag me deeper into the floor. But slowly, my body began to heal from my injuries. The bleeding stopped. The aches in my bones dulled. My strength returned. I tested the restraints. They groaned faintly under the strain. Days passed. 5 of them, by my count. I bided my time, gathering strength, waiting until I felt strong enough to break free. When the moment came, I gritted my teeth and pulled with everything I had. The cuffs shrieked in protest, then finally snapped apart in a burst of broken metal. I roared, the sound bouncing against the metal walls, and hurled the pieces aside. My fist slammed into the wall until cracks spread like webs across the surface. One more final strike broke it open, revealing the void of space beyond. Without hesitation, I launched myself through the hole, my body cutting through the vacuum as I sped toward the planet where the mothership should have been. I didn't know Nolan had planted a tracker on my shoulder. I didn't know my escape had been allowed.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.